Werner and Klein realized this army was mostly untrained peasants with poor equipment, far inferior to even Solon's auxiliary units. Werner did not expose this, nor did he expect much from them. Their mere presence pressured the western border, forcing Harold to divert troops and easing the burden on Carnford's main front. He used his elite troops as an execution squad to drive the Valaya forces, utilizing them for logistics and intimidation. Thus, in the muddy, thawing northern frontier, the war began. On March 7th, the southern mountain roads were a treacherous mix of melting snow and mud. A blue river of Carnford vanguard troops marched steadily toward the Golden City. Led by Commander Roderick, the force included 2 flintlock companies, a mountain company, and 500 auxiliaries. They were supported by 1 4-pounder cavalry cannon and 4 mobile minion cannons, tasked with clearing the path for the main army. Heave, heave. The north wind blows, the banners fly. Under the Lord's command, our spirits are high. Over mountains and waters, we fear no road. For Carnford, we strike the sullen foe. The soldiers' rugged song echoed through the valley, dispelling the early spring chill. They marched with heads held high, muskets shouldered, keeping perfect time. The flintlock musketeers marched in a 3-column snake formation, standard for mountain terrain to maintain cohesion and allow rapid defensive pivoting. On plains, they would use a faster 6-column formation for quicker deployment. Weber stood out amidst the loud marching songs. He mimed the singing while focusing entirely on battling the treacherous mud. The northern frontier's early spring thaw turned roads into energy-sapping quagmires of slick, viscous sludge over frozen ground. Every step required a forceful pull, and freezing mud seeped into his boots, causing constant discomfort. Weber glanced down at his mud-caked, sturdy military boots. Carnford's logistics were excellent. He was already on his 2nd pair, with a spare kept as a platoon leader. He carefully stepped on grass roots or existing footprints to conserve energy. His thoughts drifted to Mia, back in Carnford, who was pregnant and due in 7 or 8 months. He hoped for a swift spring offensive so he could return by summer's end to witness his child's birth. He pushed away thoughts of death and the pension, resolving to be extra cautious to ensure his return. On March 8th, the vanguard reached a narrow valley blocked by a fortified stone and wood complex. Scouts signaled an ambush. Roderick moved forward to observe with his telescope. It was Nayland Castle, a site easily taken by me last year, now heavily reinforced by Harold. Roderick frowned. The defenses were far more sophisticated than traditional Solonian tactics, clearly inspired by Carnford's own methods. Beyond the reinforced castle, a field defense system had been established. A man-high earthen wall blocked all bypass routes, fronted by trenches filled with sharpened stakes. The wall featured sandbag protrusions for artillery and heavy muskets, with forward outposts scattered ahead. Though shallow in depth, the defense was exceptionally sturdy, concentrating firepower within the narrow valley. Roderick cursed. Harold had turned Nayland Castle into a formidable obstacle on the path to the Golden City. He ordered the battalion into defensive positions, flintlock musketeers to the left, mountain company to the right, auxiliaries to dig foxholes, and artillery to prepare for deployment. The unit transformed into a defensive hedgehog. Horns sounded from Nayland Castle. Solonian soldiers appeared behind the walls, aiming muskets and bows. At 300 paces, both sides exchanged threatening, albeit inaccurate, fire. For 2 days, the front became a bloody, silent war of attrition between scouts. Roderick deployed elite mountain company soldiers and flintlock musketeers to probe for weaknesses and clear Solonian scouts. The Solonians, commanded to hold, sent tribal hunters and elite infantry to block them. Brutal skirmishes erupted in the rocky, forested slopes. The fighting was intimate and lethal, arrows, matchlocks, and cold steel used in a ghostly game of cat and mouse. During a night infiltration, Weber's platoon triggered a crude alarm trap, a string of tin cans. Solonian sentries sounded the alarm, and fire arrows illuminated the area. Weber ordered an immediate retreat. Under fire, Weber rescued a wounded soldier, sustaining a minor arm injury himself. While Carnford's troops were better equipped, the Solonians fought with a newfound, desperate tenacity to defend their home. Both sides suffered losses, but the Solonian line held firm. On March 10th, Roderick ordered a battalion-level assault to breach the trench line. Minion cannons were positioned to provide suppressive fire, while a 4-pounder targeted the suspected command post. The artillery opened fire. Minion cannons hammered the walls with solid and canister shot, churning the earth. Solonian falconets and archers returned fire, but were largely blocked by Conford's breastworks. After 15 minutes, the wall and wooden palisades were heavily damaged. Roderick ordered the advance. 300 flintlock musketeers marched in tight formation, Weber among them, hearts pounding. The company commander shouted to maintain pace. At 150 paces, the Solonians unleashed a hail of arrows and musket fire. The Conford line closed ranks and pressed on. First rank. Kneel. Aim. Fire. The first volley of flintlock muskets filled the air with smoke, striking down several Solon archers atop the breastwork. Second rank. Forward. Fire. Sustained fire suppressed the defenders as the unit reached the trench, which was deeper and wider than expected, filled with stagnant water and sharpened stakes. Auxiliaries. Bring the planks. Move. Auxiliaries rushed forward with heavy planks under heavy fire. Many fell, their blood staining the wood and mud. Weber watched a young soldier take a heavy arrow to the chest and collapse into the trench, covering fire. Now, Roderick roared from the rear. With the musketeers suppressing the wall, the survivors managed to bridge the trench with 3 blood-soaked planks. Musket company. Cross the trench. Take the wall. Roderick seized the moment. Charge. Soldiers scrambled across the slick, swaying planks. Weber followed, the wood groaning underfoot as the screams of the wounded rose from the trench. Reaching the other side, Weber scrambled up and charged the breastwork with his bayonet. The wall was heavily damaged, and dozens of Conford soldiers surged through the breach, engaging the Solonians in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Cries of "For Conford" and "For the Great Chieftain" filled the air as bayonets clashed with scimitars. Weber bayonet a Solonian, narrowly dodged a battle axe, struck his attacker with his rifle butt, and finished him off. The mud turned dark red. While the Conford soldiers were better trained and coordinated, the Solonians were numerous and ferociously stubborn. Within minutes, a third of the Conford attackers fell, while Solonian reinforcements poured in from the rear. "Commander, the breach is lost. There are too many of them," a bloodied captain shouted. Seeing his men nearly surrounded and reinforcements blocked by the trench and heavy fire, Roderick knew they faced annihilation. "Damn it!" Roderick ordered a retreat, calling for artillery to cover their withdrawal. The retreat horn sounded. The Conford soldiers turned to disengage, the most dangerous phase of the retreat. Weber and his comrades formed a small circle, fighting their way back with bayonets and sporadic musket fire, while losing men to the pursuing Solonians. Back behind their lines, only 40 of the 80 men returned, most wounded. Weber suffered a painful knife wound to his arm. Conford lost 47 dead and over 20 seriously wounded. The Solonians lost 60 to 70 men but held the line, quickly plugging the breach with corpses and sandbags. Recognizing the strength of Nayland Castle's defenses, Roderick abandoned the assault, shifting his strategy. That evening, the vanguard battalion withdrew south under cover of their artillery. Solonian scouts followed to confirm the retreat. 50 miles south, Roderick halted at a site with a ruined military fort, ordering immediate fortification. The troops dug trenches, erected breastworks, and set up check hedgehogs using the fort's stone base as a core. Auxiliaries established supply depots, signaling a long-term presence. Solonian scouts were kept at bay by rigorous patrols and musket fire. This new camp acted as a wedge, cutting off Solonian reconnaissance and threatening Nayland Castle's flank. A standoff ensued. The Solonians dared not leave the castle to attack, fearing a main legion assault. Roderick waited patiently for his main force, sending out cavalry to scout the area. The smoke cleared, but the tension remained. 30 miles north of the fort, a deep, forested mountain range lay in an eerie, oppressive silence. The spring forest, usually alive with birds, was deathly quiet. From the outside, the forest appeared empty, with no signs of military activity. Yet, over 5,000 elite Solonian warriors lay in wait beneath the canopy. They remained motionless like snakes, hiding behind rocks and trees to avoid detection. The soldiers ate dry rations and snow in silence, wrapped in furs against the mountain chill. In a small clearing, Harold sat in a tent, watching his silent troops through the opening. He had discarded his royal regalia for simple leather armor and a dark wool cloak. With his face smeared in ash and mud, he looked less like a king and more like a seasoned hunter. Harold had personally drilled these elites in primitive survival and stealth. They had gone 2 days without fires, relying on body heat and dry rations. Harold shared their hardships, demonstrating that this war was a matter of survival. Sven entered, covered in mud, and whispered, "Your Majesty, our scouts have established a blockade. Carnford's reconnaissance teams have been turned back. They cannot break through." Harold nodded. Concealment was merely the prelude to a lethal strike. Harold looked at Sven, his eyes sharp in the dim tent. "Any news on my main force?" Sven shook his head grimly. "Carnford's vanguard battalion is vigilant, their patrols and outposts forming an impenetrable barrier. Their intelligence bureau is also active. Our scouts have suffered losses to traps and ambushes. We cannot bypass them to locate the main legion." Harold's expression chilled at the mention of the intelligence bureau, which had caused him immense trouble in previous wars. "Humph," he scoffed, his voice laced with disdain and irritation. "They're bold, using a single vanguard to block my vision." He stood and walked to the tent entrance, staring toward the abandoned fort held by the Carnford forces, a cold plan forming in his mind. "If they want to be a shield, we'll shatter it. Concentrate all forces and annihilate this vanguard with overwhelming speed. I want to see if I dare to intervene." He turned to Sven. "If I don't, we eliminate my elite vanguard, crushing their morale and regaining scouting initiative. If I do," Harold's lips curled into a hunter's smile, "the terrain is perfect for an ambush. We'll use my vanguard as bait to lure my main force out for a decisive field battle, far from the walls and trenches of Carnford." Sven realized the intent, a classic besiege a point to strike reinforcements maneuver. Success depended on speed, destroying Roderick's battalion before I could react. "I'll mobilize the Tiger and Bear elite battalions to encircle the fort under the cover of night," Sven vowed. "Be fast and ruthless," Harold commanded. "Keep the scouts focused on the south. Report any movement from my main force immediately." "Yes, Your Majesty." Sven saluted and vanished into the shadows. Harold sat back on his furs, closing his eyes to prepare for the coming bloodbath. Meanwhile, south of the fort, my main force advanced steadily through the valley. I rode in the center, flanked by Brendan, Leon, and my staff. The army's movement was a heavy, rhythmic thrum of thousands, signaling an unstoppable force despite the muddy roads. Brendan approached with a report. "Roderick's latest update. They were intercepted at Nayland Castle. The enemy has fortified it with trench systems modeled after our own. Roderick's probe failed with some casualties. He has retreated to an abandoned fort to reinforce and establish a defensive perimeter, successfully blocking enemy scouts." I listened, my fingers tapping rhythmically against my reins. I was not surprised by the enemy's resilience. Harold was a capable opponent. Roderick's cautious retreat and establishment of a forward base were exactly what was needed. I pondered the reports from other fronts. Roland's forces were advancing smoothly toward Twin Rivers City with minimal resistance, confirming the diversionary nature of that front. On the west coast, Werner and Klein's Marines had seized several forts, successfully pinning down Solonian forces. Only the southern front, where I led my elite, faced organized resistance. Nayland Castle was a deliberate, hardened obstacle. As expected, I muttered, a mix of admiration and mockery in my tone. Harold's intuition remained sharp. Harold had clearly identified the southern front as the decisive theater and concentrated his defenses there to protect the lifeblood of the south, the Golden City. Should we launch a larger assault on Nayland Castle, or accelerate the main force to link up? Brendan asked. I did not answer immediately. I weighed the risks. Rushing would expose my intent and potentially force the Solonians to retreat into the impregnable Golden City, making the siege far bloodier. I remained cautious. I knew Harold was a wolf who excelled at field ambushes. Was the strong interception at Nayland Castle a trap to lure me into a hasty, disadvantageous battle? No, I said calmly. Order Roderick to hold, reinforce scouting, and watch the flanks. No attacks larger than a company without my command. I looked at my generals. We maintain our current pace. Keep tight formations, extend scouting 20 miles out, and avoid deep pursuits. We will advance step by step, solidifying our supply lines as we go. We will choose the time and place for the decisive battle. Tell the army to stay alert but patient. We can afford the wait. Harold cannot. Yes, my lord, the generals replied. Morning mist clung to the abandoned fort held by the Carnford vanguard. The fort had been reinforced with logs, earth, and sharpened wooden stakes. Soldiers went about their morning routines, unaware of the tension in the surrounding woods. Suddenly, a young scout in the makeshift watchtower shouted, "Commander, look, black smoke on the northern ridge." The alarm shattered the camp's tranquility. Roderick, who had been inspecting the cannons, rushed to the watchtower, his boots thudding against the wooden stairs. He grabbed the telescope and peered toward the north. His brow furrowed as he focused the lens. About 10 miles away, a thick, straight column of black smoke rose from behind a high ridge. It was too stable and dark to be a natural wildfire. It was clearly a signal fire. Wolf smoke. Roderick lowered the telescope, his face grim. A signal fire deep in enemy territory was a dire omen. Moments later, a second column of thick black smoke rose from a lower hill 5 or 6 miles east of the first signal, piercing the thin forest canopy. The two smoke columns stood out against the pale morning sky like two silent, ghostly fingers pointing toward their position. Another one. It's the signal of the Sorin barbarians. Below the watchtower, sharp-eyed soldiers noticed the anomaly, and murmurs of alarm quickly spread through the camp. The comm ranks grew restless. A cold sense of being watched by an unknown threat rippled through the men. Despite their combat experience, being marked by the enemy in unfamiliar territory left them deeply uneasy. Young staff officers on the tower looked at Roderick with visible tension. One swallowed hard and asked, "Commander, do we retreat or hold?" Retreat meant abandoning their hard-won outpost and risking ambush. Holding meant facing a potentially superior enemy force. It was a dilemma. Roderick's heart hammered, his fingers trembling slightly as he gripped his binoculars. He felt the immense pressure. The smoke signals confirmed the Solonians were mobilizing, likely targeting his isolated vanguard battalion. With enemy numbers and intent unknown, their situation was critical. Yet, he knew he could not show panic. As the backbone of the force, his composure dictated their morale. If he faltered, the men might collapse before the battle even began. He lowered his binoculars, forcing a cold, calm expression, even twitching his lips as if the smoke were merely scenery. He turned to his tense staff and issued clear, firm orders. "Messenger, here." A nimble young soldier stepped forward. "Ride south immediately to the main force," Roderick commanded. "Report that we have sighted 2 or more smoke signals to the north, likely Solonian mobilization signals. No large enemy force is in sight yet. We will report again once we confirm their numbers and movements." He added, "Tell the courier to be vigilant and avoid enemy scouts." "Yes, Commander." The messenger repeated the orders, saluted, and sprinted toward the stables. Watching him leave, Roderick felt a moment of relief. The warning was sent. Now, he had to prepare for the coming storm. Hold and wait for reinforcements. Staff map. Roderick scanned the terrain. The fort sat on a small hill, open but isolated. If surrounded, it lacked depth and would be easily breached. My eyes locked on a natural rise about 300 paces northeast, a small plateau higher than the surrounding paths. With steep, wooded slopes on either side, it was unsuitable for large-scale charges and perfectly commanded the northern road and the eastern ravine path. "There," I pointed. I ordered the mountain company commander. "Take the whole company, grab tools, and seize that high ground. I want a field defense line facing north and east within 2 hours. Trenches, breastworks, check hedgehogs, build them fast." "Yes." The commander roared to his men. "Mountain company, move out to the high ground. Take your tools, double time." Nearly 100 soldiers, leaving only a few sentries, grabbed shovels, pickaxes, and sandbags, racing toward the plateau like hunting leopards. Upon arrival, officers immediately designated defensive sectors. The soldiers began digging frantically, planning an irregular, forward-projecting fan-shaped formation. The front faced the expected enemy approach, while the flanks relied on the steep slopes, creating a mutually supportive position with the main fort. Dig deeper. Pile the dirt back. We need stakes. Cut some trees. Watch for falling rocks. The damp air filled with the sound of digging and shouting. The moist spring soil was easy to work, and the veteran soldiers were highly efficient. Following Conford's manual, they piled excavated earth toward the enemy to form a breastwork, forcing attackers to climb a steep mound after crossing the trench. Stronger soldiers cut sharpened trees to create makeshift check hedgehogs, placing them before the breastworks and along the flanks. Engineers stealthily planted landmines, tripwire traps, and caltrops in the brush and paths ahead, preparing a deadly gauntlet. Simultaneously, I adjusted the fort's firepower. The minion cannon was pushed to the center of the forward fan-shaped position, providing the best field of fire over the northern road and eastern ravine. After leveling the ground, the crew installed heavy iron shields on the cannon for protection. The gunner cleaned the barrel while another prepared a solid iron shot. The silent muzzle pointed toward the smoke. I then summoned the 2 remaining flintlock musket company commanders, hardened veterans. "Listen," I said. "First company, hold the west and southwest. Second company, hold the south and southeast. Secure the fort and serve as the reserve and final line of fire." I warned them. "Conserve your volleys. Do not waste powder or stamina on stray scouts or reckless hunters. Leave individual targets to the archers or ignore them. Save our volleys for organized enemy charges. Fire when they are at their densest and most aggressive. Keep 2 squads ready at all times. If the forward line gaps or the enemy flanks us, you must be ready to reinforce or counterattack." "Understood. Understood, Commander," the 2 replied instantly. As veterans, they knew the value of fire discipline and reserves when outnumbered. My plan was the most sound approach to maximize their limited strength. The orders were relayed, and the companies adjusted their positions behind the fort's walls and new wooden palisades. Auxiliary soldiers distributed arrows to the archers, while others took up spears and shields to fill gaps between the musketeers. The entire camp, from the forward field works to the fort core, became a bristling iron hedgehog, efficiently completing its final preparations. The wind grew colder, carrying the scent of fresh earth and a faint metallic tang. The wolf smoke signals in the north had faded, yet the tension in the air grew stifling. Soldiers worked in silence, the only sounds being the scraping of tools against rock, hushed orders, and the restless snorting of horses. Roderick stood atop the watchtower, his eyes scanning the northern shadows and ridges like a hawk. He waited for the Solonians to emerge from the direction indicated by the smoke. His men had sharpened bayonets, loaded muskets, and deepened trenches, turning the plateau into a silent death trap. Sending the messenger hadn't fully eased Roderick's anxiety. He knew the main force needed time to react, and the Solonians could strike at any moment. He needed intelligence on their numbers and direction. Despite the extreme risk to his scouts, he had no choice. Roderick summoned 5 of his sharpest, most skilled young cavalrymen from the scout unit. They were green, but possessed keen eyes. "Head north along the main road and the eastern valley. Do not engage. If you spot a large force, retreat immediately and report. Avoid entanglement with small patrols," he ordered. "Understood, Battalion Commander." The 5 replied, checking their carbines and sabers before mounting up, their faces set with focus. "Go. May the gods protect you," Roderick signaled. The 5 riders bolted from the fort, their horses kicking up mud. They split into 2 groups, 3 on the main road and 2 toward the valley, quickly vanishing into the northern woods. Roderick watched until the last silhouette disappeared before lowering his arm. His throat felt dry, his heart pounding heavily. Every soldier was precious, especially these scouts. Sending them into the unknown, potentially Solonian-infested woods, felt like casting stones into a dark abyss. He forced himself to turn away, refocusing on the ongoing fortification efforts. He could only wait and ensure this outpost was as secure as possible. Suddenly, a loud, impassioned shout from the mountain company's position cut through the noise. "Brothers, dig deeper. Build the breastwork higher. Let those northern savages see the might of the Carnford people." We're here to teach them a lesson. The voice was young and slightly cracked from exertion, but it was highly stirring. Roderick looked over to see Tommy, the unit's instructor, wielding an entrenching tool and packing down dirt with frantic energy. Well said. Carnford Mountain Company, first. Make sure they don't return. The troops responded with renewed vigor, their digging speed and morale visibly increasing. The previously oppressive atmosphere was now charged with a newfound, bloody determination. Roderick watched Tommy with complex emotions. The instructor position was a new initiative by Edgar's civil administration and the military. Edgar and I believe the army needed a soul, a clear understanding of why they fought. These educated, articulate youths were embedded in units to boost morale, teach policy, and organize activities. Initially, pure soldiers like Roderick viewed them as useless talkers who distracted from command. But seeing Tommy laboring in the dust and sweat, his efforts clearly lifting the soldiers' spirits, Roderick's opinion wavered. Perhaps they were useful. At the very least, Tommy made the soldiers feel supported. He recalled Edgar's private request. Roderick, Tommy is a promising talent. Keep him in your battalion to learn, but protect him. Don't let him reach the front line. He has great potential. Protect. Watching Tommy work like he wanted to dig to the center of the earth, he didn't look like a sheep needing protection, but a fledgling bird courting danger. Unable to stand by, Roderick walked down to the front line. Tommy was wiping sweat and mud from his face. Instructor. Roderick saluted, his tone respectful but firm. Tommy blinked, surprised, and returned the salute clumsily. Commander, you need me? Yes, Roderick said, lowering his voice. This will soon be the front line. The Solonians are coming. It's too dangerous here. I suggest you return to the castle. Your talents are better suited for the rear. Roderick was being polite, but his meaning was clear. You don't belong in combat. Tommy understood. His face paled slightly, but his eyes grew resolute. He straightened his thin frame and saluted again, this time perfectly. Commander, thank you. But I wear this uniform. I am a Carnford soldier. A soldier does not retreat when the enemy approaches. I have my duties, whether with a pen or a shovel. He softened his tone but remained firm. You are the commander. Lead the battle. I have my own work. Please, leave me to it. Turning away, he shouted to the resting soldiers. Hey, keep at it. This wall is our shield. For Carnford, and for ourselves. You got it, instructor. The soldiers cheered, resuming their work. Roderick was left speechless. He wanted to invoke Edgar's orders or use his rank, but seeing Tommy's earnest, youthful face and his natural rapport with the men, the words died in his throat. Perhaps the lad wasn't as soft as he thought. His courage surpassed many seasoned recruits. But courage alone doesn't win battles. As Roderick debated whether to forcibly remove him, bang! A sharp, sudden flintlock musket shot rang out from the northern woods, echoing chillingly through the valley. Everything, the digging, the hauling, and the conversation, froze instantly. Soldiers froze as a gunshot rang out from the north, shattering the tense air. Roderick's heart sank. His scouts had been intercepted. Defensive positions, he roared, his voice strained. Officers echoed the command. Get to your posts. Musketeers ready. Soldiers grabbed their flintlock muskets and scrambled into the fresh foxholes, while gunners primed the minion cannon, aiming at the forest edge. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the wind, until a rhythmic thundering emerged. Rapid hoofbeats drummed from the main road, accelerating toward them. 3 exhausted horses burst from the tree line, carrying 3 of the 5 scouts Roderick had dispatched. The survivors were bloodied and panicked, firing carbines backward at their pursuers. Bang! Bang! Their backward shots were erratic, serving only to delay the enemy. Within seconds, war cries and whistling arrows erupted. 7 or 8 Solon cavalry charged out, hunting them like wolves. The Solonians wore leather or breastplate armor, brandishing scimitars and spears. 2 riders fired arrows with deadly precision, striking the ground near the fleeing scouts. Sorin barbarians. They're on us, the Carnford soldiers cried. Soldiers raised their muskets, but the targets were moving too fast. Roderick watched, helpless to fire for fear of hitting his own men. Get to the Czech hedgehogs. Roderick screamed at the scouts. The scouts spurred their horses toward the breastworks, mud flying. A Solan knight surged forward, wielding a heavy throwing spear. At 30 paces, he hurled the spear like a black bolt toward the rearmost scout. "Look out!" someone shouted. The scout tried to dodge, but the spear struck true. The projectile pierced his back, exiting his chest. He tumbled from his horse, dead before he hit the mud. "Hans!" the survivors cried, pushing their horses to the limit to reach the gap in the defenses. The Solonians howled, emboldened to charge the fort. Minion cannon. Canister shot. Fire! Roderick bellowed. Boom! The cannon erupted, spraying iron balls and nails into the charging cavalry. Puffed, puffed. The lead riders were shredded, their horses collapsing in a bloody heap, halting the charge. The two surviving scouts scrambled through the gap and were pulled behind the breastwork. They collapsed, gasping and trembling. Terrified by the cannonade, the remaining Solonians retreated, dragging their dead and leaving the body of the scout behind. The scent of gunpowder and blood hung heavy in the air. Only 2 of the 5 scouts returned, bearing a grim message. The enemy was here, and they were lethal. The scouts were brought before Roderick. They were covered in mud and gore, still reeling from the ambush. "Commander, there are thousands of Solonians. They're everywhere. We hit their vanguard. Hans is dead." Roderick suppressed his alarm. Panic-stricken reports were useless. He gripped their shoulders firmly. "Steady. You're the eyes of this army. Report facts, not poetry. How many banners? Infantry or cavalry?" His calm demeanor helped the scouts regain their composure. "The valley is packed with cavalry dismounting to form up," one reported. "At least a dozen banners. Over 2,000 men, likely more. There's a massive dust cloud behind them." Roderick realized the enemy intended to launch a full infantry assault. "Well done. Hans's sacrifice won't be in vain. Get to the castle, see the medic, and rest. I'll need you back on the line soon." "Yes, Commander." They saluted and headed for the fort. Just as Roderick processed the intel, a deep, rhythmic vibration shook the ground. It was the sound of thousands of hooves, a tidal wave of steel and flesh approaching from the north. "Enemy attack. All units to your posts," the sentry screamed from the tower. Roderick rushed behind the breastwork, peering through his telescope. The sight beyond the valley's exit sent a chill down his spine. A torrent of Solan cavalry poured from the mountain pass like a dam bursting, flooding the shallow, dish-shaped valley before their positions. Solan knights, clad in leather and iron armor, surged forward like a muddy, iron-scented landslide, their horses' hooves churning the earth. Above the cavalry, a sea of banners, wolf heads, eagle feathers, and tribal totems snapped in the spring wind, signaling the massive scale of the approaching army. Beneath the flags, a dense mass of spear tips and helmets shimmered under the bleak sky like endless gravel on a riverbank. The cavalry did not charge directly. Instead, they spread toward both flanks as if possessed of a singular will. Squads peeled off toward the wooded slopes to secure high ground and prepare a pincer movement. The main force slowed, soldiers dismounting and handing their horses to grooms before gathering under their respective banners. The chaotic cavalry tide was rapidly transforming into a heavy, organized infantry formation. From Roderick's vantage point, the enemy front seemed endless, as if the entire valley floor were crawling with Solan soldiers. Even by conservative estimates, over 2,000 infantry were already deployed, with more dust clouds rising from the pass behind them. "Stop construction. Everyone to battle stations." Roderick roared, his voice cutting through the thunderous rumble. "Check powder, flints, and muskets. Move." The order rippled through the defenses. Soldiers abandoned their shovels and picks, grabbing their flintlock muskets and rushing to their firing positions. The sounds of digging were replaced by the clatter of metal, urgent commands, and heavy breathing. Quartermasters distributed pre-measured powder packets and lead bullets in leather pouches along the communication trench. Musketeers performed final checks, clearing barrels, testing flintlocks, and securing ammunition in their pouches. Gunners wiped down the minion cannons, adjusting angles and readying solid shot and canister shot. Amidst this tension, one man stood apart. Tommy, the young instructor, leaned against the fresh earth of the breastwork, trembling uncontrollably. His shovel lay forgotten as he stared at the expanding black tide, a cold dread freezing his blood. His earlier fervor and sense of heroism evaporated before the sheer, overwhelming reality of the war machine before him. Seeing over 1,000 Solon soldiers already in formation, with more to come, the crushing weight of the numbers far exceeded any report he had read. He could smell the enemy's scent, a mix of horse, leather, and sweat, and hear the clashing of their weapons. Will I survive? The thought gnawed at his courage like a viper. He was only 20, with an elderly mother and a brilliant younger sister back in Confort. He had joined the army to build a new Confort, carrying the high expectations of Edgar. He had never imagined facing death on such a flimsy, makeshift line against such overwhelming odds. His hands shook violently. No matter how hard he clenched his fists against the cold earth, he could not stop the tremors born of deep-seated terror. His face flushed, cold sweat mixing with dirt as his legs felt like lead, refusing to obey him. He glanced around. Everyone was busy, focused on the impending slaughter. The quartermasters, musketeers, and gunners all moved with practiced, steady efficiency, their faces set in grim determination. No one noticed the instructor, who stood trembling like a terrified recruit on the verge of collapse. Shame and fear threatened to drown him. He had always been timid, a secret he had never confessed, not even to Edgar. He had seen corpses before, but only when his side held the absolute advantage. This was a desperate, lopsided nightmare he had never envisioned. I must live, for my mother, for my sister. This desperate will to survive kept him from breaking entirely. He refused to die here, forgotten in a muddy, foreign valley. I looked down at my officer's pistol, a polished, rarely used ornament at my waist. The sight of the weapon gave me a focal point. With fumbling, shaking fingers, I struggled to unbuckle the holster. Finally, the cold brass grip hit my palm. The weight of the metal strangely calmed my racing heart. I mimicked the musketeers, focusing on the mechanical task of loading, which pushed my paralyzing dread to the back of my mind. As Tommy fought his fear, the Solon army finished their adjustments. The Confort defense had clearly surprised the Solon commander, thwarting their plan for a swift, decisive cavalry breakthrough. Transitioning from pursuit to a siege formation took time in the confined valley. A deep, solemn horn blast echoed from the Solon lines, signaling a shift in command. The sound snapped Tommy back to reality. He watched as the Solon soldiers organized into units of hundreds and thousands. Spearmen moved to the front, backed by archers and matchlock musketeers, while engineers carried scaling ladders and rams. The sheer mass of the enemy remained suffocating. This forced pause gave the Confort line a final, precious moment of respite. With frantic effort, the soldiers reinforced the breastwork until it stood nearly chest-high, providing vital protection for the coming fight. After breaking their tools, the soldiers finally rested against the cold, damp earth, drinking water and checking their weapons. Their sweat-soaked undergarments clung to their skin, but no one cared. Under their officers' commands, over 300 mountain company soldiers and a few musketeers formed a tight, circular defensive perimeter on their fan-shaped position. The spacing was precise, balancing firepower density with room to maneuver. Despite being outnumbered, their fortifications gave this hedgehog formation a fighting chance. Roderick seized this final moment to dispatch 2 more messengers. The intelligence was dire. Over 4,000 Solonians were forming up in the valley to assault the position. They were prepared, but the odds were overwhelming. They needed immediate reinforcements. The messengers took the urgent dispatches and rode south along a pre-cleared path, carrying the army's last hope. Roderick then turned his gaze toward the frail figure nearby. I leaned against the breastwork, pale but steadying my hands as I fumbled with my musket. Roderick approached, his voice raspy and pleading. "Instructor, you see the Solonians. There are too many. It's too dangerous here. Please, go back to the castle. Your talents shouldn't be wasted here. Edgar entrusted you to me. He left the rest unsaid. He could not let me die." I looked at the mud-stained, bloodshot, yet resolute face of the commander. I felt a surge of warmth and guilt. I remembered my earlier weakness, the soldiers facing death, my oath, and my family back home. I took a deep breath, forced myself to stand straight, and shook my head. "No, Commander. I'm staying. Someone needs to shout something here." I felt the reason was silly, but my eyes remained fixed. Suddenly, boom, 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 boom. Deep, rhythmic war drums erupted from the Solon lines, striking fear into the hearts of the Confort soldiers. The Solon army began their advance, their infantry marching in lockstep to the drums. Their armor glinted under the gloomy sky, spears leveled. The silence of their disciplined march was far more intimidating than the previous cavalry charge. Meanwhile, Solon skirmishers moved through the woods on the flanks, preparing to envelop the position. The Confort soldiers, exhausted from their frantic labor, sat in a tense, weary lull, facing the silent, massive enemy. A crushing sense of psychological inferiority began to permeate the line. Young soldiers turned pale, gripping their weapons until their knuckles whitened. The only sounds were the wind and the approaching enemy. Just as morale threatened to shatter, clang! A sharp metallic ring cut the silence. I pulled my officer's saber, a weapon I had rarely used in combat. I gripped it with both hands, pointing the blade at the approaching tide, and roared with all my might. The barbarians are here to die. Brothers of the Mountain Company, people of Confort, for our homes, kill the barbarians. The cry was untrained, off-key, and desperate, but it was raw and piercing. It shattered the ice of their fear. Kill the barbarians. Like a spark in a fuel depot, the soldiers around me roared back. It spread like wildfire. Kill them. For Confort. Die, you bastards. Hundreds of voices erupted in a violent, primal howl. Muskets, spears, and shovels were brandished in the air. Their faces, once filled with fear, were now twisted with a mixture of rage and fanatical determination. The previous dread was incinerated by this collective scream, replaced by the fierce resolve of cornered beasts. At that very moment, boom! A thunderous roar erupted from the fort behind them. The 4-pounder falconet had finally fired. The cannon spat fire and smoke, recoiling violently. A solid iron shot tore through the air, screaming toward the dense Solon ranks. The shot plowed through the black formation, leaving a bloody, mangled gap in its wake. Roderick stood by the breastwork, ignoring the impact to watch his men. He looked at their fierce, transformed faces, then at me, as I stood panting, my face pale but my gaze steady. He remained silent, his lips twitching slightly. The battle had begun, ignited by the off-key roar of a nervous intellectual and the blast of an old cannon. The absurdity of it brought Roderick a strange, calm clarity amidst the pressure. He gripped his sword, watching the black tide recover from the cannonade. Now, it was time for the direct collision of steel, fire, and will. The iron ball whistled through the air like the finger of death, plunging into the dense Solon infantry. Thud, crack, snap. There was no explosion, only the sickening sound of breaking bones and tearing flesh. It was a brutal collision of iron and life. Men fell like wheat before a scythe. Shields shattered like paper, and armor offered no protection against the kinetic force. Debris and broken weapons flew into the air. A bloody path was carved instantly through the black sea of soldiers. The path was a gruesome mess of limbs and gore, soaking the spring earth in dark red. Those hit directly died instantly. Those struck by fragments shrieked in agony. The Solon lines wavered, but their officers roared, using their blades to force the men forward. Hold the line. Don't break. Rear ranks. Fill the gap. Move. For the great chief. Advance. Driven by officer pressure and tribal honor, the Solon soldiers stepped over their twitching comrades to fill the gaps in their ranks, despite their pale faces and visible terror. Within seconds, the gaps were plugged, turning the formation back into a seemingly orderly, yet internally trembling, black reef. Confort's gunners offered no respite. Boom! As the Solonians filled the gaps, a second cannon blast roared from the fort like a death knell, sending another iron ball crashing into the crowd. Splat! Crack! Aya! The tragedy repeated. The formation was torn open again, leaving blood and screams in its wake. The narrow valley and dense infantry formations prevented the Solon army from dispersing effectively before reaching the Confort position. Dispersing would have weakened their charge, turning it into a piecemeal slaughter against the defensive line. They were trapped in a dilemma: stay dense and be cannon fodder, or spread out and lose their striking power. The elevated fort provided the 4-pounder falconets with an excellent field of fire. Gunners barely needed to adjust their aim to hit the narrow main road packed with Solon soldiers, maximizing the efficiency of the falconets' rapid fire. Roderick intentionally focused fire on the vanguard to prune the Solon army's spearhead, disrupting the rhythm and formation of their most elite warriors. Each volley left the Solon vanguard more disorganized and sparse, replacing their fanaticism with fear and hesitation. In contrast, the Conford position erupted in cheers. "Great shot! Well done, artillery! Hit them again!" Every cannon roar and subsequent sight of Solonians falling triggered bloody, ecstatic cheers behind the breastwork. This was an emotional release for the defenders, proving they could strike back under immense pressure. It acted as a stimulant, washing away fear and replacing it with the fanatical belief that they could hold the line. Morale was strangely solidified through this brutal performance. On a nearby hill, Harold lowered his telescope. His face was expressionless, but his gray-blue eyes held surprise and deep confusion. This small Conford force's reaction speed exceeded his estimates. Instead of retreating upon seeing the smoke signals, they had quickly occupied the terrain and constructed breastworks, trenches, check hedgehogs, and foxholes. This forced his planned cavalry assault to a halt, as the narrow terrain made charging suicidal. Forced to abandon his preferred horse archery and mobility, he had to resort to costly infantry assaults. The unreasonable morale of the Conford position further baffled him. A force of fewer than 1,000, surrounded by a superior enemy, should be desperate or broken. Yet, the defenders were cheering and working in an orderly fashion, showing no signs of panic. Their fighting spirit defied his understanding of a force in a desperate situation. "Your Majesty," Sven whispered, "this Conford vanguard is only a few hundred strong. Even with cannons, our warriors should take them in 2 charges." Harold remained silent, staring at the noisy position. "Sven, I wonder not if they can hold, but why they can," he mused. "Facing a superior force, why are they not panicked? Why is their morale so high? If the commander were I, Brendan, Leon, or Roland, I would understand. But this is an unknown battalion-level officer. Is every Conford unit this disciplined and brave?" This touched on the core of military organization and morale. Sven, an expert in charging, could only lower his head. "I do not know, sire." Then boom, 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 boom. The Solon war drums signaled the final assault, drowning out the battlefield noise. The infantry let out a collective roar, and the massive, dark formation began its final, bloody advance. Harold's confusion vanished, replaced by cold, murderous intent. Regardless of their tenacity, they would be crushed by sheer numbers and Solon valor. He needed this first wave to demonstrate Solon's resolve, forcing Conford to see their determination to fight to the death. Any hesitation would prolong the battle, which he wanted to avoid at all costs. "Sven." Harold's voice turned sharp. "I am here." Sven bowed. Harold's gaze remained on the advancing troops. "Lead the execution squad. Tell the Kiliarchs and Centurions, there is no retreat today. Even if they all die, not one is allowed to return alive. Execute any who retreat on the spot, and hang their heads before the line." "Yes, Your Majesty," Sven replied without hesitation. He understood his brother's resolve and the cost in Solon lives. But he knew that against a hard target like Conford, only ruthless, suicidal aggression offered a chance at victory. He mounted his horse and galloped toward the rear of the vanguard. Meanwhile, Roderick returned to the fort's command center. Tommy remained on the front line. Though worried, Roderick had a larger battle to manage. From the fort's stone base, Roderick used his telescope to observe the Solon army. He noticed that the constant artillery fire had caused a clear disconnect between the Solon vanguard and the rear echelons. The lead force of about 1,000 men was disorganized and demoralized, while the reinforcements behind them were struggling to reorganize in the limited space. Roderick felt a surge of confidence. Despite the enemy's numbers, the terrain prevented them from deploying their full strength. He only had to face the weakened, disorganized vanguard. The pressure was less than he had anticipated. He looked at his position, the abandoned fort and the occupied heights, and felt satisfied with the natural defensive synergy he had created. The road winds from the valley, forming a gentle slope before the position, which sits at a higher elevation than the surrounding terrain. Any Solonians attacking must charge uphill. The front, being the widest point, is also the Carnford army's strongest defensive line, featuring 4 minion cannons deployed on the flanks for crossfire, in addition to the 4-pounder falconet on the fort. Dense forests on the rear flanks restrict Solonians from massing heavy forces and prevent their archers from finding effective vantage points. Any flanking attempt would fragment their formation, slowing their reinforcements significantly. This terrain is why Roderick is confident in holding the front with minimal troops. A shrill horn blast from the Solonians drowns out the war drums. A dark tide of infantry accelerates toward the Carnford position. The clatter of armor and the rhythmic thud of thousands of boots create a suffocating wave of sound. 200 paces, the lookout shouts. The 4-pounder falconet ceases solid shot fire. Gunners immediately swab the hot barrel with wet burlap to clear it for the next round. White steam hisses from the barrel. Others check the breech and carriage, preparing for the next volley. On the front line, the Carnford Mountain Company falls into an eerie silence as the Solon army enters the final charge. Excitement fades into cold, focused killing intent. Officers bark sharp orders. Check your powder. Confirm flints. Keep your eyes front. Check bayonet locks. Soldiers move with mechanical precision, eyes locked on the approaching wave of enemies. The Mountain Company commander paces the trench, shouting, "Watch your range markers. Only fire at those directly in front. Wait for my signal for the first volley, then squad leaders take over." He roars. Wait for the bugle for the minion cannons. No firing early, and no one charges out for melee until they cross the trench. Anyone who does, I'll shoot myself. Yes, the soldiers respond, eyes sharpening. Tommy leans against the breastwork, his body stiff but his hands steady. He grips his officer's pistol, white-knuckled, silently chanting, "Aim for the thickest part. Aim for the thickest part." He forces his focus entirely onto the upcoming shot. First 2 ranks, crouch, the commander bellows. The first and second ranks drop, clearing the line of fire and shielding themselves from arrows. Third rank, ready. The commander watches the Solonian vanguard. Ready, the soldiers echo, a simplified command system to ensure clarity in the chaos. The sound ripples down the line, signaling the battle phase. Clack, the third rank of 80 musketeers stands, bayonets gleaming under the overcast sky. These young soldiers, faces flushed with adrenaline and tension, breathe visible white mist into the cold air. They are a mix of fear, excitement, and disciplined instinct. Aim. Muskets level at the black tide below. Beside the cannons, gunners hold torches, waiting for the signal. The Solonians are within 100 paces. The narrow front prevents them from stopping to fire arrows, and their archers are left far behind by the chaotic terrain. They must charge through the kill zone to reach the Carnford line for close-quarters combat. The Solon soldiers howl, shields raised, eyes burning with bloodlust. A forest of spears, blades, and maces surges forward, the sound of their advance threatening to overwhelm the defenders' nerves. The commander tenses, watching the tide. 70 paces, 65. Now, fire, he screams. Bang, bang, bang. Dozens of orange flashes erupt from the front line. A storm of lead tears into the Solonian ranks. Art. The front line of Solonians is struck as if by a giant hammer, collapsing instantly. Lead balls shred leather armor and bone. The first rank is mowed down, their screams blending with the thunder of musketry. Second rank, stand, the commander orders coldly. The first rank rises to fire while the third rank falls back to reload, their muscle memory overriding their nerves. As the second rank aims and the Solonians stumble over their fallen, the 4-pounder falconet fires again. Boom! This time, it unleashes a devastating spray of canister shot. Over 70 lead pellets and iron nails fan out, obliterating the densest part of the enemy formation. Solonian shields are shredded like paper. The soldiers are riddled with holes and fall in heaps. The pile of corpses creates a barrier, stalling the charge and shattering the enemy's momentum. The gunners reload with cold, mechanical efficiency. Aim, fire. The second rank fires, another volley of white smoke and lead. The Solonians, trapped among the dead and wounded, are cut down in droves. The mounting piles of bodies force the survivors to slow down, their charge losing its edge as they scramble for cover. Despite heavy casualties, the Solonians continued their relentless advance up the slope, pushed forward by the mass behind them. First rank, stand. The first rank rose to aim. Meanwhile, the third rank, having finished reloading, leveled their muskets with cold, predatory focus. The mountain company commander scanned the slope. I noted that even at this range, the Solonians had failed to organize a single effective archery volley. Their ranged capabilities were clearly crippled by terrain, previous shelling, or a collapsed command structure. It was an opportunity. I held my fire, waiting for the enemy to close in, forcing them to commit fully to a desperate, tightly packed melee charge. That would be the moment for a lethal, decisive blow. The line fell silent, save for heavy breathing, the scent of sulfur, and the chaotic wails from below. This pre-storm stillness was suffocating. Every Conford soldier gripped their trigger, eyes locked on the black tide struggling through the carnage. The Solon soldiers surged upward like a beast, trampling their own dead in a frenzy of survival and bloodlust. Their faces were twisted with madness and greed for the Conford position. 30 paces, close enough for spears, axes, and a desperate leap onto the breastwork. I stood like a statue, ignoring the stench of death. I focused entirely on the distance and the enemy's formation, waiting for the perfect moment. Seeing the Solonians' desperate, disorganized push, I realized, now. I swung my arm down like an executioner's axe. Fire! The command unleashed hell. Over 80 muskets and the fort's 4-pounder cannon roared in unison, a deafening thunderclap. A thick wall of white smoke erupted as lead balls and canister shots slammed into the dense Solonian mass 30 paces away. Ugh! The impact was devastating. The frontline Solonians were struck by an invisible, spiked wall. Bodies flew backward or crumpled, torn apart by the kinetic force of lead and the wide spray of canister shot. The vanguard was wiped out instantly, leaving a gory trail of corpses and viscera flowing down the slope. Woo-woo! Sharp bugle calls echoed from the flanks, the signal to fire. For hidden minion cannons were primed and ready. Gunners touched their torches to the vents. Boom! The minion cannons emitted a sharper, more piercing report than the 4-pounders. They fired in a pre-calculated crossfire pattern, sweeping the front of the Solonian charge from both sides. Over 100 iron pellets tore through the air like two giant, invisible brooms, scything through the dense enemy ranks. The crossfire was absolute, leaving no blind spots across the width of the approach. Swish! The effect was horrific. The Solonian vanguard was effectively severed in half. The area was cleared of life, replaced by a spray of blood, limbs, and shattered weapons. The charge stalled, the survivors paralyzed by the inescapable, flanking slaughter, instinctively recoiling in panic. Yet, the Solonians' inherent ferocity and the threat of their execution squads sparked a final, desperate surge. A few blood-soaked warriors, ignoring their wounds, howled like beasts and led dozens of others across the killing field, reaching within 20 paces. Seeing the madness in their eyes, I abandoned the rigid volley for a more flexible tactic. Free fire. Shoot! I drew my own officer's pistol and fired at a Solonian squad leader about to leap into the trench. Bang! The squad leader collapsed into the spiked trench with a dull thud, silenced instantly. Free fire. Aim true. The line erupted into a continuous, ragged roar of individual musket fire as soldiers targeted the nearest threats. Officers, military police, and even instructors like Tommy joined the fray. Tommy, having just reloaded his pistol, heard the order. His heart hammered as a painted, shirtless Solonian warrior charged toward him, a heavy throwing axe raised high. The warrior's eyes locked onto Tommy's. Instinctively, Tommy raised his pistol and fired blindly at the charging shadow. Bang! The recoil kicked his thin frame back, his aim jerking upward. He had no idea where the shot went. As the smoke cleared, Tommy saw the warrior unharmed, wearing a mocking sneer as he swung his arm forward. Whoosh! A heavy throwing axe spun through the air with a lethal whistle, hurtling toward Tommy. It moved so fast he could see the dried blood on the blade. Whoosh! The axe grazed Tommy's shoulder, drawing blood, before continuing its path. Ah! A scream erupted beside Tommy. A young musketeer was struck squarely in the chest. The axe embedded deep. He dropped his musket, clawed futilely at the handle, and collapsed, his blood staining the earth. "Replace him," a sergeant roared hoarsely. A reserve soldier stepped over the body, raised his musket, and fired without hesitation. Tommy stared at his fallen comrade and the quivering axe, his mind blank and stomach churning. Overcome by guilt and terror, his hands shook so violently he could barely hold his weapon. He retreated to the rear, gasping for air against the cold earth wall. The gunfire at the front became chaotic, losing the rhythmic, devastating impact of coordinated volleys. Despite the piles of corpses, the Solonians, driven by ruthless execution squads, surged forward in an endless, brutal wave of close-quarters attrition. Simultaneously, Solon scouts and archers appeared at the edges of the flanking forests. Abandoning large-scale maneuvers, they used trees and rocks as cover, popping out to fire heavy arrows at the Carnford flanks before retreating. Thud! Thud! Arrows struck shields and breastworks, occasionally finding their mark in the Carnford ranks. Archers, suppress the tree line. Fire at will, the officers commanded. Carnford archers returned fire. Though their lighter bows lacked the power of the Solon heavy bows, their superior numbers and defensive positions allowed for effective area suppression. Arrows flew back and forth, temporarily checking the Solon harassment. However, the frontal pressure remained lethal. Driven by their execution squads, the Solonians used their numerical advantage to grind their way closer. A Solon soldier, shielded by his comrades, reached the breastwork and thrust a spear at a young musketeer. The soldier was pierced through the shoulder and fell back. Savages are over the wall. A nearby Carnford soldier turned and fired point-blank, obliterating the attacker's head. But the dam had broken. More Solonians swarmed over the bodies of their fallen to reach the breastwork. The battlefield erupted into a deafening cacophony of screams, gunfire, and clashing steel. Many raw recruits entered a state of manic, adrenaline-fueled shock. With bloodshot eyes, they mechanically repeated the cycle of loading, firing, and stabbing, their screams drowned out by the roar of battle. Trained to be killing machines, they held the line through sheer repetition. When the cannons fired, the resulting metal storm provided the only brief respite from the relentless tide. But the Solonians kept coming. Many stepped on caltrops, yet, driven by bloodlust, they ignored the pain, dragging their bleeding feet forward to assault the wall. Carnford musketeers scrambled to reinforce the line as hand-to-hand combat broke out across multiple sectors. Soldiers used bayonets and rifle butts to repel those attempting to scale the breastwork. The slope became a primal grinder of flesh and bone, filled with the sounds of dying men and tearing bodies. Forcing myself to focus, Tommy reloaded. Through the smoke, he saw the line buckling under the relentless assault. Overcome by duty, he stood up and screamed to his comrades, "Hold the line. Fight them back. My army is coming." For Carnford. His face turned red, veins bulging from his neck. Yet, his voice was swallowed instantly by the roar of the battlefield. No one even looked his way. Every soldier was fighting for their own survival. Slogans were meaningless in this hell. Tommy slumped back against the wall, his brief spark of courage extinguished by overwhelming exhaustion and despair. Upon receiving the second urgent report from Roderick, the Carnford Main Legion halted in a sheltered valley. A command tent was erected, the atmosphere inside colder than the northern wind. A map of the southern frontier lay on a wooden table, illuminated by flickering lanterns. I leaned over the table, my gaze fixed on the abandoned fort where Roderick's vanguard was besieged. Leon pointed at the map with a rod, his voice urgent. "My lord, Roderick's report confirms the Solon army has massed over 10,000 troops, likely led by Harold himself. They intend to annihilate the vanguard. We cannot abandon our brothers. This is the perfect opportunity to engage Harold in a decisive battle right here." His resolute words ignited the fighting spirit of the officers in the tent, who envisioned a crushing victory and the rescue of their comrades. "General Leon, stay calm," Brendan said, pointing at the map. "Roderick reports over 10,000 Solonians, yet only 3,000 are attacking. Harold is no fool. If he wanted to crush Roderick, he would have used overwhelming force. Why drag it out? Brendan looked at me and the officers. I suspect a classic besiege a point to strike reinforcements tactic. Harold is using a detachment to bait us. His main force is likely waiting for us to divide our strength in desperation. He traced a 40-mile line through rugged mountains. If we rush to help, our troops will arrive exhausted and disorganized. If Harold has an ambush, we won't just fail to save Roderick. We'll lose our reinforcements too. The room grew cold as officers whispered. Harold's cunning at Conford was still fresh in their minds. He was certainly capable of this. I remained silent. I scanned the map, looking from the besieged Roderick to the surrounding valleys, then back toward my main force and the vulnerable Grey Wolf territory. If Harold bypassed the battle to strike the undefended Grey Wolf territory, he would cut their supply lines and retreat path. They would be trapped between a strong enemy and no exit. Two choices clashed in my mind: the cold, rational path versus the emotional one. Option 1. Ignore the plea, maintain formation, and continue toward the Golden City. Strategically, the sacrifice was valuable, but it meant watching 1,000 loyal soldiers, including the brave Roderick, die executing my orders. Option 2. Divide forces to rescue them. It would boost morale but carried immense risk. Who to send? How to avoid an ambush? Failure would destroy morale and ruin the spring offensive. Harold was likely waiting for this exact mistake. Silence filled the tent, broken only by the wind. Everyone waited for my decision. The exhausted messenger waited outside. Every second of delay brought Roderick closer to collapse. Beads of sweat formed on my forehead. As Lord, I had faced many trials, but never one where duty, morality, and military survival were so cruelly pitted against each other. The pressure was suffocating. A raspy, clear voice broke the silence. I think we should save them. All eyes turned to Otto, a veteran commander of the 3rd Regiment. Usually quiet and overlooked, he was known for being a simple follower, not a leader. I turned to him. Commander Otto, explain. Otto spoke plainly, his eyes steady. I'm no strategist, but we are Conford soldiers. Roderick and his men were ordered to scout. They're fighting to the death. We're only 40 miles away. Can we really watch our brothers bleed out? Brendan is right about caution, Otto continued. But if we abandon our own out of fear, we lose our soul. If we don't save them today, who will save us tomorrow? The men will lose heart. I'll lead my 2 best companies as the vanguard. If we fall into an ambush, at least we die saving our brothers. Otto's words hit the officers like a physical blow. A young officer stood up. I agree. If we ignore our brothers, we lose the very spirit that makes us an army. We can't let them down. We must save them. The room erupted in calls for action. Brendan raised a hand, his face stern. I know the pain of losing brothers, but consider the strategy. Harold wants to force a decisive battle on his own terms. He pointed at the mountains. This terrain is perfect for ambushes. Our goal is the Golden City. The Golden City offers open ground for our firearms and logistics. Pressuring it will cripple the Solonian economy. That is our true strategic goal. He looked at me pleadingly. If Roderick's sacrifice keeps Harold's main force pinned, it serves our greater strategy. The room fell silent again, the conflict between emotion and logic reaching its peak. I wiped sweat from my brow. I could not hesitate any longer. Indecision was the worst mistake of all. My mind is made up, I declared. Leon, assemble the dragoons. Travel light and fast. Harass the Solonians to relieve pressure on Roderick and scout for ambushes. Do not get bogged down in a full engagement. Yes, my lord, Leon replied. Otto, here. Take your 2 best companies and 2 reinforced grenadier companies. Follow the dragoons. Break the siege and link up with Roderick at all costs. I'm giving you 2 minion cannons. Move as fast as you can. Understood, my lord. Otto saluted, his scarred face grim. I looked at Brendan. Brendan, move your regiment forward in a combat-ready formation. Keep pace behind them, ready to support at any moment. Yes, sir. Brendan bowed, accepting my decision to balance rescue efforts with tactical caution. I recognized this compromise preserved their main force while showing resolve. Orders were relayed, and the camp erupted with the sound of assembly bugles. Leon's dragoons charged out first, their horses thundering toward the northern mountains in a cloud of dust. Otto followed closely with 4 reinforced companies, carrying muskets and light artillery at a forced march. Outside the military fort, the fan-shaped defensive line was a chaotic scene of carnage. Driven by the relentless Solon Provost Corps, the Solon soldiers displayed terrifying tenacity despite heavy casualties. They charged through lead rain, forcing the Confort soldiers to abandon disciplined volleys for free fire. The soldiers fought on instinct and rigorous training, their faces pale and twisted. Reloading became a frantic, uneven struggle against fear and exhaustion. Officers relied on their personal guards to hold the line as the roar of battle drowned out their commands. Brutal hand-to-hand combat erupted where breastworks were breached. Blue uniforms clashed with white Solon armor as bayonets, scimitars, spears, and battle axes collided. Blood slicked the ground as the defensive line teetered like a boat in a storm. Tommy crouched in a crater behind the breastwork, hands trembling as he attempted a desperate reload. After seeing a fellow musketeer fall, he forced himself to focus on his musket. As he fumbled with powder and lead, a sudden spray of warm, viscous liquid drenched him. Tommy gasped, blinded by the gore, and wiped his eyes to see. A Conford musketeer had collapsed, a heavy Solon arrow protruding from his chest. The rain of blood had come from him. A blood-stained hand gripped the breastwork, and a heavily armored Solon soldier began to climb over. With the musketeer dead, a gap opened, leaving only the terrified Tommy to face the intruder. Nearby soldiers were too preoccupied with their own struggles to notice the breach. Panic surged, stripping away Tommy's training and leaving only the primal instinct to survive. Relying on muscle memory, he shoved the powder and lead into the barrel, his hands shaking violently as he reached for the ramrod. The Solon soldier, exhausted by his climb, stumbled, giving Tommy a precious second. With a bestial roar, the Solon soldier vaulted over the wall, landing just 3 paces from Tommy. The intruder, face scarred and eyes burning with bloodlust, raised a notched scimitar. Around them, the battle raged, with soldiers locked in desperate struggles, oblivious to this small, lethal gap. Smoke and chaos obscured the scene. Tommy's teeth chattered. He could smell the beast-like stench of his attacker. Death had never been closer. He rammed the charge home and cocked the hammer with a sharp click that cut through the noise. The Solon soldier, seeing the trembling, blood-covered youth, lunged forward. He reached for Tommy's throat with a guttural growl. Ah! Overcome by terror, Tommy pulled the trigger by instinct. Bang! The deafening blast and recoil sent Tommy's arm jerking upward. White smoke engulfed the immediate area. Tommy stared through the dissipating haze, his mind blank. The Solon soldier staggered, the bullet having punched through his armor. The momentum of his charge halted instantly. His fierce expression faded into a look of confusion. He swayed, his scimitar dropping as his arm went limp. Thud! The armored soldier collapsed face first into the mud, inches from Tommy. He twitched once, then fell silent as the light left his eyes. Tommy gasped for air, his musket still smoking. He stared at the corpse, fighting back the urge to vomit. He had killed. He had survived. A squad of reserve force musketeers arrived, immediately forming a line behind the breastwork. Aim, fire. Bang, bang, bang. A precise volley downed the Solon soldiers attempting to breach the gap, temporarily halting the crisis. Soldiers quickly sealed the breach with sandbags and corpses. Tommy caught his breath, retreating to lean against a rear earth wall, finally looking toward the smoke-shrouded military fort behind them. The fort was under heavy assault. Solon cannons pounded its stone walls. Roderick's battalion was clearly under immense pressure, unable to assist the forward position. Just as Tommy felt the worst had passed, a cry erupted. Kill them all. The barbarians are retreating. We won. A wave of ecstatic, exhausted cheers swept across the front line, marking their survival. Tommy struggled to his feet and peered over the breastwork. The sight was harrowing yet relieving. The slope 20 paces ahead was carpeted in a chaotic tangle of blue Carnford uniforms and white Solon armor. Blood pooled in the low ground, while broken banners and weapons littered the hellish landscape. Further away, hundreds of Solon survivors fled in panic down the valley. Their first major assault had been repelled by heavy casualties and shattered morale. Victory! Long live Carnford! Mountain Company! Soldiers cheered wildly, young recruits waving muskets and helmets in the air. Some wept, some collapsed, while others stared blankly at the carnage, still in shock. The mountain company commander's roar cut through the celebration. Don't just stand there. Teams 1 and 2, evacuate the wounded. 3 and 4, drag the enemy corpses to reinforce the breastwork. 5, deepen the trenches. Engineers, check the landmines. I kicked a sullen officer's corpse, strip their armor, and wear it. Move. They'll be back. The orders were cold and pragmatic. The soldiers immediately returned to grueling labor. The air remained thick with smoke and blood, but the front was quiet save for the sounds of digging and the distant, angry shouts of the Solon execution squad. On a distant hill overlooking the battlefield, the atmosphere was cold and oppressive. Your Majesty, I failed. Sven knelt before Harold, bloodied and ashamed. The routed troops are panicked. They even turned on the execution squad. I had to pull back to regroup. Losing a third of 2,000 elite troops in the first wave was a heavy blow to morale and Harold's authority. Harold listened in stony silence, his face unreadable. He stared at the blood-soaked valley, watching the Carnford soldiers fortify their position with the bodies of his own men. Finally, he waved a hand, silencing Sven's apology. Routes are inevitable when fear overcomes honor, he said, his voice flat but masking a brewing storm. He didn't blame Sven. The collapse was a natural consequence of the mounting casualties. Focusing on the stubborn Carnford position, he stated, prepare the second wave. Sven looked up in disbelief, questioning the lack of a pause to regroup. Harold analyzed the situation. They've been breached. Carnford musketeers are weak in melee. Their losses must be severe. They are at their limit. He lowered his voice. More importantly, we have no retreat. He turned to Sven, his gray-blue eyes filled with urgent anxiety. Our position is exposed. If we can't take this small force in an hour, do you think I am a fool? We know my decisiveness. I likely know of this already. I won't let this vanguard be wiped out. My reinforcements are probably on the way. He tapped his sword hilt. If we get bogged down, it won't be a siege to strike reinforcements. It will be a pincer attack. We could be chased all the way to the Golden City. Sven broke into a cold sweat, realizing the catastrophic chain reaction. He hadn't considered the strategic disaster of a delay. I would never miss this chance. The consequences of a pincer attack were unthinkable. We have no time to hesitate, Harold concluded. We must crush this nail in the next wave or two, regardless of the cost, before I arrive. He looked at Sven with cold authority. Tell the Legion commanders I will oversee the next wave personally. No retreat. Anyone who crosses this line, he pointed to the edge of the hill, including you or me, will be executed. Sven shivered, seeing the look of a desperate, cornered wolf in his brother's eyes. Knowing Harold had staked everything on this, Sven bowed. Yes, Your Majesty. He descended the hill to deliver the brutal orders. The Solon drums sounded again, signaling a new wave of demoralized, ragtag troops. These were the Plantagenet Collaborator Army, composed of defectors and slaves. With his elites shattered, Harold used these cannon fodder to exhaust the Carnford defenders' ammunition and stamina. Forward, cowards! For the great chieftain! Death to those who retreat! The execution squad drove the terrified collaborators into a loose spear phalanx toward the Carnford position. The forest of spears looked fragile in the cold, early spring wind. The road was narrow and rocky. The terrain forced the phalanx into a slow, disorganized crawl, with soldiers stumbling and crowding each other. As the first phalanx paused to reform at 200 paces, the fort's 4-pounder cannons seized the opportunity. Boom, boom. 2 solid iron shots tore through the dense formation, carving bloody paths through 6 ranks. Over 20 men fell instantly, their screams and the sound of shattering bones throwing the formation into total chaos. The winter-trained puppet troops, facing Cranford's cold, precise firepower for the first time, collapsed in terror, many losing control of their bowels. The Solon Provost Corps whipped and hacked at the panicked soldiers, forcing the crumbling ranks forward. The Solon commander switched tactics, using small, successive waves to draw and exhaust Cranford's artillery fire. Cranford's position remained silent. Soldiers waited behind reinforced breastworks, muskets leveled. Many wore looted Solon armor over their blue uniforms, making them hard to distinguish from the enemy, save for their cold, weary, and murderous eyes. The puppet vanguard halted at 150 paces, musketeers trembling as they raised their archaic matchlock muskets. Before they could aim or ignite their fuses, a roar shattered the silence. Fire! The mountain company commander's shout triggered a deafening volley. The first rank of flintlock muskets and the minion cannons erupted, blanketing the vanguard in a lethal web of lead and canister shot. Screams followed the impact. The front rank fell like mown grass. The few scattered shots from the puppet musketeers went wild, missing the breastworks entirely. With the bait cleared, the remaining spearmen panicked, firing blindly into the smoke. The sporadic, uncoordinated shots hit nothing. The smoke obscured the field, but the experienced Cranford soldiers remained safe behind their cover. "Reload, fast," the officer commanded. The soldiers performed the complex loading sequence through muscle memory. Second rank, ready, fire. A second, more disciplined volley tore into the main body of the puppet formation. The impact was devastating. Of the 100-man formation, only a dozen terrified survivors remained standing amidst the corpses. Many spearmen in the rear fell to stray lead. The puppet musketeers descended into chaos, dropping powder and fumbling their reloads. The Solon Provost Corps, eyes bloodshot, butchered any soldier attempting to retreat, driving the broken unit toward the Cranford position. At 30 paces, the commander ordered, "Third rank, fire." A final volley, combined with canister shot, turned the ground into a blood-soaked slaughterhouse. "Demons! They're demons!" the puppet troops screamed, abandoning their weapons and fleeing. The massacre shattered their remaining sanity. The Provost Corps' threats meant nothing against the meat grinder ahead. But there was no escape. The second wave of puppet troops waited behind them, spears leveled into a dense, bristling wall of steel. "We're on your side. Let us through," the fleeing soldiers begged. The second wave responded with cold, merciless thrusts. The retreating soldiers were impaled on their own side spears. Bodies piled up, blocking the path. Only a few managed to scramble into the bushes to survive. As the road clogged with corpses, the Provost Corps drove the pale, trembling second wave over their comrades' warm bodies toward the breastworks. Their wild, inaccurate musketry posed no threat. The Cranford commander watched the approaching formation and ordered, "Cease fire. Hold until my command." The position fell silent, save for the distant, erratic Solon gunfire. At 40 paces, as the enemy reached the pile of corpses, the commander roared, "Pull." Engineers yanked the tripwires hidden in the dirt. Massive explosions rocked the field. Grouped landmines, packed with rocks, iron nails, and ceramic shards, detonated in the heart of the second formation. A storm of shrapnel erupted. The blast tore the front ranks to pieces. The spear forest collapsed into a scene of carnage and dying screams. Third company, fire. The commander seized the chaos to unleash another lethal volley into the survivors. The puppet troops' sacrifice had successfully drained Cranford's ammunition and slowed their rhythm, shielding the approach of the true threat, Solon's heavy infantry. During the brief reload interval, a primal roar erupted. "For the great chieftain! Kill them all!" Solon's heavy infantry charged, sprinting over the blood and bodies of the puppet troops. They abandoned dense formations for a rapid, skirmishing assault. A hail of thrown weapons arched toward the breastworks. Metal clanged against armor and flesh. Cranford soldiers fell, their armor failing to absorb the massive kinetic impact of the heavy projectiles. Solon heavy infantry swarmed the breastworks, slamming shields against the wall and climbing over, faces inches from the defenders. "Hold the line. Thrust." Cranford's line faced its direst test. Musketeers fired their final shots at point-blank range, then immediately used their empty flintlock muskets as spears or grabbed blood-stained Solon spears to fend off the black-clad figures swarming the wall. The rear ranks fired through gaps whenever a Solon soldier appeared. Bang! Squish! Arg! The battlefield erupted in a chorus of screams, blending the agony of both sides into an indistinguishable roar. Cranford officers screamed orders, but their voices were drowned out by the cacophony of clashing metal, gunfire, and dying cries. Command collapsed. Both sides devolved into primitive, bloody attrition. Cranford's line was stretched thin, forced to defend against the frontal assault and Solan skirmishers harassing the flanks from the woods. Many sections of the breastwork were held by only a few rows of men, while Solonians committed elite heavy infantry to create local numerical superiority. Solan archers and hunters stayed 10 to 20 paces from the breastwork, using cover to launch precise, heavy arrows. Their rapid fire forced Carnford to divert precious musketeers to counter them, despite the muskets' superior power. In the dense woods, however, the muskets struggled against the dispersed skirmishers. In the center, Solan heavy infantry gained the upper hand, skewering Carnford soldiers or hacking them down with battle axes. Corpses piled up on both sides of the breastwork, forming small, dark red pools of blood that flowed through the gaps. The air was thick with the stench of gunpowder, blood, sweat, and viscera, a suffocating, metallic scent of death. Yet, like a reef in a storm, Carnford's line held, cracked but unbroken. Years of propaganda had painted the Solonians as greedy, inhuman beasts who delighted in slaughter and slavery. Soldiers were told that capture meant torture far worse than death, with their families facing ruin. Carnford's harsh military code dictated that deserters and their families would be executed or stripped of all property and freedom. Trapped by these dual shackles, surrender or retreat meant total destruction. There was no way back. Despair, while often destructive, here forged a ferocious, stubborn will to fight. These young soldiers, initially terrified, saw their comrades fall and realized retreat was hell. A primal, desperate rage ignited within them. Kill them all. Fight to the death. For Carnford, driven by a bloodlust that erased fear, the line refused to yield a single step. As the front rank fell, the rear immediately stepped up, seizing the weapons of the dead. Even the wounded, gasping for air, used knives or stones to strike at any white-armored legs within reach. Men with severed limbs bit at enemies. Those with disemboweled guts tied their wounds with belts and kept firing. It was a war of survival with no mercy. Both sides pushed their endurance to the absolute limit. The breastwork became a meat grinder, with every inch of soil bought with lives. The setting sun cast a grim, dark gold light over the blood-soaked battlefield. At the other end, the military fort suffered similarly. Continuous Solan bombardment finally collapsed a section of the wall. Solan elites swarmed the breach like hyenas scenting blood. Roderick led the survivors to form a final line of flesh among the rubble. The breach became a grinding mill of death. Bodies tumbled from the gap, quickly buried by the relentless tide of reinforcements. New soldiers filled the gaps, their eyes vacant or wild, continuing the endless slaughter. Tommy, having emptied his muskets, stood by the breastwork. Kill. Hold the line. Thrust. Amidst a forest of spears and bayonets, Tommy's comrades fell like autumn leaves. Men were pinned to walls, skulls split by axes, or hacked down in melee. Blood soaked the earth and ruined uniforms. Solan soldiers breached the breastwork, engaging in desperate hand-to-hand combat inside the perimeter. The line shattered into countless small, bloody vortices of death. Tommy retreated to a secondary breastwork with a few wounded men, his hands shaking too violently to reload his last lead ball. Suddenly, a familiar, raspy roar cut through the chaos. Carnford men. Fight to the death. Not one step back. It was the mountain company commander. Tommy looked up to see the blood-stained spruce banner still waving. Beneath it, I stood on a mound, hacking away with a notched blade. My voice rallied the nearby soldiers, who surged forward to counterattack. Yet, local courage could not reverse the overall collapse. Tommy watched in horror as the left flank crumbled, allowing Solan heavy infantry to pour into the rear. They slaughtered everything in their path. As Tommy gripped his blade, locking eyes with a grinning Solan Decurion approaching him, a roar erupted from the left. Arg! For Carnford. A blood-drenched officer, fueled by final strength, sprinted toward the densest cluster of Solonians, clutching a black wooden barrel. He moved with a calm, divine madness. The Solonians were too slow to react. Boom! A terrifying explosion erupted in the center of the Solonians, a fireball blooming like a gateway to hell. The shock wave tore through the air, shredding the nearest Solan soldiers like paper. Those at the core were vaporized. Those further out were crushed by the blast, falling like felled timber. Tommy stared blankly, his mind a void. Seconds or centuries later, the deafening roar of battle pierced my hearing, jolting me back to reality. Gunpowder, barrels, I muttered, scanning my surroundings frantically. Behind some artillery wreckage, I spotted a black wooden barrel half buried in the dirt, accompanied by cylindrical paper-wrapped charges. My heart hammered against my ribs. I lunged, clawing away debris to reveal the heavy, cold barrel marked with a white skull. Meanwhile, Solon soldiers were swarming the gaps in the defenses. They gained the upper hand through sheer numbers, a particularly fierce soldier pushing into the center where the wounded lay. The soldier grinned, butchering the helpless, immobile Conford wounded with his heavy scimitar. My gaze shifted from the slaughter back to the cold, heavy barrel at my feet. There are few chances in life to truly change anything. A chillingly calm thought formed. If I detonated the barrel among the Solon soldiers, I could stop them, even if it cost my life. Images of my mother, sister, Edgar, and my home flashed through my mind. I was young and had so much left to live for, yet I realized I would never see my family again. Tears carved tracks through the blood and grime on my face as I bit my lip until I tasted iron. I looked at the rampaging Solon soldier, then back at the silent, destructive power of the barrel. Time froze. The world narrowed down to me and the barrel. I let out a low, final laugh. I grabbed the barrel and began to drag it toward the center of the position. Before I had taken 10 steps, a massive force slammed into my back. A metallic clang rang out as I collapsed, the barrel rolling away. I turned to see the mountain company commander, blood-soaked and pinned by a Solon arrow in his shoulder. The commander's eyes burned with intensity as he rasped, "Instructor, leave the dying to me. You must survive to lead the men." The commander sprang up, ignoring the arrow. He grabbed the powder, clutched a broken spear, and roared, "Lead the survivors to the military fort. Tell Roderick, the mountain company didn't fail him." He charged toward the most dangerous breach, a madman rushing into the flames. A group of Solon heavy infantry was surging through the rear breastwork toward the last of the Conford resistance. The commander was struck by an arrow, but the Solon soldiers simply stepped over his body. Then, I witnessed a sight I would never forget. The commander detonated the powder, the massive explosion tearing through the tight Solon formation. Limbs, armor, and debris were hurled into the air by the orange fireball, raining down like macabre confetti. A charred, smoking crater marked the epicenter. The Solon formation was shattered, the closest soldiers were vaporized, while others were tossed aside like broken dolls. The shockwave left the Conford lines reeling, soldiers dazed and deafened. The surviving Solon soldiers near the blast were disoriented, their equilibrium destroyed. They stumbled like drunkards, clutching their bleeding ears and wailing. Further back, the Solon charge stalled, the soldiers staring in terror at the zone of death. The Solon assault force was on the brink of collapse. I, covered in blood, stared at the dissipating smoke, my world muffled and silent. But the commander's final roar and the searing image of his sacrifice burned through my numbness. Ah! A primal scream tore from my throat, drowning out the ringing in my ears. The commander had taken the choice of survival from me, replacing it with a burning need for vengeance. I grabbed a blood-stained spear, my eyes reflecting the fire of my rage. Kill! Like a wounded beast, I charged. I drove the spear into the flank of a disoriented Solon soldier, ignoring the spray of warm blood. The soldier fell with a scream. I moved to the next, skewering a dazed Solon archer and then a light infantryman, acting with manic, lethal efficiency. When my spear jammed, I discarded it, grabbing a notched cleaver from a corpse. I hacked through chain mail and leather, my strikes fueled by pure adrenaline. My mind held only one thought: vengeance. I fought for the commander, my fallen comrades, and the terrified boy I had been moments before. As the front line crumbled, the remaining Conford soldiers gathered silently beneath the bullet-riddled spruce banner. Ragged and wounded, they prepared for a final, hopeless stand, guided only by instinct and the banner. I, cleaver in hand, stumbled through the thinning smoke to join them. Behind the dust, more Solon soldiers stood dazed by the explosions, too exhausted to even flee. Tommy charged into the crowd, hacking and smashing with his broken blade. using his hilt, feet, and head when the edge failed. I fought mechanically until my arms went numb, my lungs burned, and my vision blurred. Finally, I collapsed against my ruined blade, gasping for air thick with blood and heat. Sweat, blood, and mud dripped from me. The adrenaline faded, leaving only hollow exhaustion. Looking around, I saw piles of corpses and few allies left. My heart sank as I looked toward the rear. Through the clearing smoke where the breach had been, a dense new wave of Solan soldiers appeared. They were fresh reinforcements, alerted by the blasts. With bloodthirsty glares, they charged toward the crumbling breastwork, weapons gleaming in the setting sun. I looked at the endless tide of enemies, then at my own trembling hands and my battered, exhausted comrades. A cold despair washed over me. It was over. The sacrifice and the fighting had been in vain. I smiled grimly, discarded my broken blade, and stood tall. I would not die on my knees. I stared blankly at the approaching enemies, waiting for the end, smelling the stench of sweat and sheepskin on them. Just as they reached the breastwork, confusion erupted. What? Behind us? What's happening? The Solan soldiers suddenly panicked, slowing their charge and glancing fearfully toward their own rear. I struggled to process the shift. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat before the impossible happened. The aggressive Solonians were suddenly gripped by sheer terror, their faces twisting in horror. They abandoned the breastwork, screaming in chaos, and scattered like rabbits, some even discarding weapons to run faster. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend the sudden turn. Victory? No, we had done nothing. Was it infighting? Or something worse? Then, a sound pierced the air. Woo-woo! A clear, high-pitched military horn call rang out like the first light of dawn. The familiar tone cut through the battlefield chaos, snapping me back to reality. It was the horn of Confort. I turned toward the western hillside, my body trembling. Through the dust, a massive, brand-new blue spruce flag appeared, cutting through the gloom like a sword. The silver-stitched spruce emblem was unmistakable. Behind it, a torrent of steel emerged from the earth. It was Confort's elite force, the dragoons, their armor gleaming and sabers drawn. Reinforcements. Lord Karl's reinforcements had arrived. My mouth hung open, soundless. Hot tears mixed with blood streamed down my face. The blue spruce flag waving in the bloody sunset was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. The arrival of the flag and the horn completely reversed the tide of battle. The Solan soldiers, who had been on the verge of victory, instantly collapsed. Run! Confort's reinforcements are here. It's the dragoons. The battlefield's tone shifted from slaughter to a rout. The remaining Solan soldiers fled in a panic, abandoning their dead and wounded. Their only thought was to find their horses and escape the death trap. Honor and rewards meant nothing now. Leon led the dragoons, charging hard to arrive just in time. As Leon crested the hill and looked down at the small defensive position, even this veteran was stunned. It was no longer a battlefield, it was a slaughterhouse. Corpses were piled so high the ground was barely visible. Blue uniforms and white Solan armor were tangled together, soldiers locked in death grips. Blood turned the earth into a dark red swamp, pooling in the lowlands. The air was thick with the suffocating stench of smoke, blood, and burnt flesh. It was a testament to the desperate, brutal struggle that had just occurred. Leon's shock lasted only a second. His experience told him to capitalize on the Solan collapse. Dragoons. All units. Leon drew his saber, pointing at the fleeing enemy. Pursue at will. No prisoners. No stopping. Kill them all. Kill. The dragoons roared, their horses thundering like a storm as they charged the scattered Solonians. Once proud elites under Harold, the Solonians were now nothing more than panicked sheep without leadership. The dragoons acted as efficient reapers, their sabers and lances cutting down the fleeing soldiers. The Solonians cried and begged, their futile attempts to block the cavalry crushed by the sheer momentum. They were trampled, slashed, and pierced. The road and hills were littered with white-clad bodies as the dragoons rode them down. Near the military fort, Roderick, covered in blood and deep wounds, finished off the last Solan soldier with a broken sword. He leaned against the crumbling wall, gasping for air as blood dripped from his armor. He had been forced to fight on the front lines himself, truly believing he would die on this foreign soil. Hearing the horn and seeing the dragoons slaughter the enemy, his taut nerves finally snapped, and he collapsed in relief. Roderick collapsed against the wall, drained of all strength, overwhelmed by the crushing exhaustion of surviving the slaughter. Survived, finally, he muttered, his face devoid of joy, filled only with hollow fatigue as he surveyed the carnage within the fort. Suddenly, he jolted, struggling to stand. Tommy, that reckless instructor, is he still alive? Using a broken spear as a crutch, he limped toward the forward position, his boots squelching through blood and over corpses. Reaching the mountain company's former line, the sight made the veteran's heart seize. Craters from landmines still vented acrid smoke, reeking of charred flesh. The small semicircular position was choked with mounds of bodies. At the breastwork, corpses formed a gruesome ramp that soldiers had to climb over. The severely wounded writhed amidst the dead, their low, agonizing moans the only sound in the graveyard. Many bodies remained frozen in their final, brutal moments of combat. Roderick saw a young Conford soldier locked in a death grip with a sullen soldier. A broken spear had pierced them both, pinning them together in mutual destruction. Such scenes were everywhere. My gaze settled on the blue flag in the center, scorched, torn, and stained with dried blood, yet still standing. Around the pole stood 20 or 30 survivors, all wounded, leaning on each other with vacant, exhausted eyes. Roderick's heart sank. Of the 460 men who had started here, fewer than 50 remained. Near the flag stood a solitary, swaying figure. My officer's uniform was unrecognizable under layers of blood and mud, my face a mask of gore, my eyes staring blankly at the sea of corpses. Recognizing the slight frame, Roderick hurried over. Tommy, Roderick rasped in disbelief. The figure stirred, my hollow gaze focusing on Roderick before my knees buckled. Roderick caught me, feeling my cold, trembling body. Patting my shoulder, Roderick's voice shook with relief and newfound respect. Tommy, you're a hell of a soldier. I thought you were just a green kid looking for a promotion, but you've proven me wrong. In the Vanguard Battalion, in the whole Carnford Army, no one will dare look down on you again. He looked around, asking, Where's Elton? Your company commander? That old dog must be fine, right? Bring him over, Commander. I snapped too, my eyes burning with grief and lingering madness. Captain Elton is dead. Silence fell. Roderick froze, his hand still on my shoulder. Nearby soldiers stopped, the only sound the distant echoes of the pursuit. Elton, Roderick repeated, his voice dry. Elton was his most loyal officer. How did he die? My eyes reddened, my voice trembling as I forced the words out. He died heroically. I gestured toward a smoking crater. He ignited a powder keg, taking a dozen sullen warriors with him. I looked at Roderick, my voice breaking with guilt. It was supposed to be me. I found the keg first. The captain, he shoved me aside and took it. He died for me. The words hit the men like a hammer. Roderick stared at the young man, consumed by self-reproach, unable to find words. Any comfort felt hollow against such a sacrifice. He gripped my shoulder tighter, trying to share his own strength. Meanwhile, on a distant hill, the atmosphere was frozen. Your Majesty, we must go, Sven shouted, panicked. The Conford dragoons are upon us. They're too fast. Harold stood motionless, staring fixedly at the distant, burning blue flag of the Conford position. He watched the Conford dragoons hunt down his once mighty Solon warriors like wolves. His soldiers, stripped of their pride, fled like sheep, only to be cut down. The hooves trampled his honor and his ambitions. Harold had kept a reserve of elite guards in the nearby woods for an ambush. They were intended for the final blow in his besiege a point to strike reinforcements strategy. But the reinforcements had arrived too quickly, and his point had collapsed. Now, these reserves were forced to act as a rearguard, buying time for Harold's retreat. Arrows flew weakly from the woods, failing to halt the dragoons. The rearguard's morale was shattered. Witnessing the slaughter of their comrades, their will to fight crumbled as the blue tide approached. The situation was dire. Your Majesty, we must leave. The cavalry is breaking through, Sven pleaded. Harold remained unresponsive, his soul seemingly captured by that distant, tattered flag. Why? How could this small Conford force, against all odds, possess such terrifying power and resolve? Why did the enemy refuse to break despite heavy casualties and repeated breaches, instead launching suicidal counterattacks? Why did their banner remain standing until the last man fell? Why did Harold, with tens of thousands of troops and the advantage of terrain and timing, suffer such a crushing defeat? Why were his battle-hardened Solan warriors slaughtered by this weak enemy, only to flee like stray dogs? How did I, a minor border lord who rose through a woman's influence, forge an army with a seemingly immortal soul in such a short time? Why? Harold stared at the flag burning in the bloody sunset, whispering the word repeatedly like a sigh. This was no longer a tactical inquiry. It was the collapse of a proud king's beliefs and his understanding of fate. He saw the blue spruce banner not as cloth, but as a symbol of a terrifying, incomprehensible power. This power turned the descendants of southern farmers and craftsmen into warriors more resilient and fearless than frost wolves. Sven watched his brother's despair, his own last shred of hope vanishing. He realized that more than a battle had been lost. Something fundamental in Harold, and perhaps all Solan soldiers, had died with the setting sun. Abandoning persuasion, he signaled his guards, "Protect the king. Take him away." Now, the guards seized the listless Harold and rushed toward the horses waiting down the mountain. Sven cast a final, hateful glance at the battlefield and the fluttering blue flag before fleeing north toward the Golden City with his brother. With Harold's flight, the last of the Solan rear guards will to fight evaporated. Leaderless and terrified by the persistent Carnford army and their dragoons, they collapsed and scattered under Leon's cavalry charge. The road to the Golden City lay open, paved with the bodies of the routed. Nayland Castle, once a heavily fortified Solan stronghold, saw its garrison's morale plummet upon witnessing the main army's defeat. Faced with the momentum of the Carnford army, their token resistance quickly crumbled. The fortress fell that same day. The Solan flag was replaced by the blue spruce banner. Leon's dragoons, like wolves scenting blood, pursued the retreating Solonians northward. They trampled abandoned supplies and corpses, spreading panic, though the fatigue of their long-distance pursuit began to slow their horses. Harold's royal guard, while psychologically shattered, still had fresher mounts. Sensing the dragoons' formation loosening, Sven led a fierce countercharge to buy time. This was not to win, but to delay the pursuit. The move forced the weary dragoons to pull back, allowing Sven to widen the gap. It was only a temporary reprieve. Leon reorganized and doggedly continued the hunt. The scattered Solan infantry became easy prey for the dragoons' sabers and lances. The pursuit ended only when the walls of the Golden City appeared. Leon, lacking siege equipment and exhausted, camped outside to watch the city. Otto's infantry vanguard arrived shortly after. They saw their banner over Nayland Castle and the panic-stricken Golden City. Otto left a company to secure Nayland Castle and marched the rest to join Leon, aiming directly at the city. 3 days later, outside the Golden City, broken, numb Solan stragglers crawled toward the city like wounded beasts. They carried the scars of battle and the shadow of defeat. Leon and Otto's troops acted as sheepdogs, picking off the stragglers with small, effortless strikes. Many Solan soldiers died within sight of the city walls. The Solan army's morale was shattered. The pride and fighting spirit that once terrified enemies had withered. Even Harold's royal banner hung limp and spiritless upon his return. The Golden City's gates were barred, filled with fearful civilians rather than the cheers of a returning army. Most men had been conscripted to face Carnford's spring offensive across the borders. Only the elderly, women, children, and a skeleton guard remained. The granary of the kingdom, long untouched by war, was now paralyzed by panic as enemy war drums echoed outside. The Solan elite were further shaken by the scale of Carnford's offensive. Roland pinned them at Twin Rivers City, while Carnford scouts and forces appeared near the coastal sea city, openly challenging Solan's authority. The pressure of defeat was eroding the foundations of the kingdom. Harold entered the Golden City quietly through a private passage, retreating immediately to his palace. He dismissed his attendants, keeping only Sven. Lying on a couch, he closed his eyes, but the blue spruce banner haunted his vision like a nightmare. The door opened and closed quickly. Leon, the general from Twin Rivers City, entered, armor scorched, and knelt. "Your Majesty." Please, stay strong. The kingdom needs you. Though we suffered a setback, we inflicted heavy casualties on me. Roderick's vanguard was surely their elite. I have been weakened too. Leon's words were a desperate attempt to comfort the king, framing the defeat as a Pyrrhic victory for the enemy to ease Harold's burden. Harold smiled bitterly. He knew Roderick's forces, while brave, were not Carnford's elite. I had decimated my vanguard with a mere detachment, leaving Harold chilled by the disparity in strength. He didn't refute Leon's polite lies, instead forcing himself to focus on the reality of the war. His voice rasped, regaining a king's calm. What is the situation at Twin Rivers City? Leon reported. Roland leads the Eastern Front. He attacked Twin Rivers, but was repelled by General Ulf. Now, they only skirmish. Werner and Valaya's forces near Sea City were repelled by Gran and Ivar. Aside from Nalen Castle, the Carnford army has made no decisive gains. Their supply lines are stretched, and their offensive momentum is waning. From a military standpoint, Leon's report suggested Solon wasn't yet doomed. Harold remained silent for a long time. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the enemy's weaknesses failing to dispel his inner dread. The brutal battle in the valley and the sight of the Carnford banner had shattered his confidence. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a collision of wills that revealed his own side's terrifying fragility. The blue spruce banner had become a silent nightmare. It represented a cold, resilient power he couldn't fully grasp. This power was taking root in land he thought was his. I set down the report in my tent, the silence broken only by the crackling lamp. I walked to the entrance, gazing toward the Golden City, my brow furrowed with heavy thoughts. I had successfully used a detachment to bait and crush Harold's vanguard, forcing the Solon King into the Golden City and shifting the strategic balance. What began as a spring offensive to drain Solon's resources now threatened to become a war of conquest. This possibility brought immense pressure rather than joy. The victory cost Roderick's unit nearly everything, and my supply lines were dangerously thin. Food, the lifeblood of my army, was now a sword hanging over my head. Edgar could squeeze supplies from Carnford, but it would cause inflation and suffering at home. I did not want my recovering territory to suffer such strain. I couldn't be blinded by victory. Enemies lurked in the shadows, waiting for me to exhaust my nation. Steady progress is the best strategy, I concluded. Harold was severely weakened and his morale was low. By controlling the Golden City's grain, Carnford could slowly bleed the Solon kingdom dry. There was no need for a risky, deep territory battle. However, Harold, driven to the brink of madness by fear, would not play along. As a veteran king, Harold knew holding the Golden City was strategically meaningless. With spring planting ruined and morale shattered, he was doomed. By autumn, Carnford would be even stronger, leaving him no chance to recover. A desperate, reckless plan took root in his mind. He had to stake everything on a decisive field battle to crush my main force and save Solon. 5 days later, my main force surrounded the Golden City. I conducted cautious probes to identify weaknesses in the city's defenses. The defenders fought with a numb, mechanical obedience rather than true spirit. Then, the situation changed unexpectedly. At dawn, sentries noticed the city walls were eerily quiet. The vanguard encountered almost no resistance. Harold had abandoned the city overnight with his main force, leaving behind even his grain stores in his haste to avoid pursuit. I secured the city after confirming Harold had truly fled. As the blue spruce banner rose over the Golden City, they discovered massive stockpiles of grain. Is Harold surrendering? Leon asked, frowning at the northern horizon. It made no sense to abandon such a vital stronghold and its supplies. Brendan shook his head, quite the opposite. It's a sweet, dangerous bait. He abandoned the city to make us think he's broken. He left the grain to lull us into complacency. He wants to lure us deep into the north, onto a battlefield of his choosing. He needs a decisive victory to restore his prestige and rally his men, or he will be slowly dismantled. Leon asked, will the Lord attack, knowing it's a trap? Brendan watched me, as I was calmly inspecting the spoils. He will. He must. First, our morale is high. Hesitation would only blunt our edge. Second, Brendan lowered his voice. The Lord sees further. We must finish Harold quickly to turn our attention to the more dangerous threats in the south. A clean, decisive battle is worth the risk. The easy capture of the Golden City and its vast grain stores pushed the Carnford army's morale to a new peak. The camp was filled with optimism as soldiers cleaned captured Solon scimitars, mocking Harold's retreat and eyeing the north, the direction of the Solon capital, Flossgard, as if victory were within reach. This fervor deeply influenced me, their commander. Standing in Harold's former council hall in the Golden City, I traced potential invasion routes on a map. While Roderick's Pyrrhic victory was costly, it had broken Harold's spine, granting me the strategic initiative. A surge of youthful ambition stirred within me. I was tempted by the idea of exploiting Harold's collapse to force a decisive battle and end the century-long border conflict once and for all. Furthermore, a swift victory would allow me to pivot south and address threats from the royal capital, particularly Queen Mother Katerina, before she could react. Time seemed to favor a bold move. I wondered if Harold's abandonment of the Golden City and its supplies was a trap or a sign of total systemic collapse. Despite the risks, the potential to secure the northern frontier was intoxicating, clouding my judgment. Just as I leaned toward an aggressive pursuit, a messenger arrived with an urgent letter bearing the Rochefort family seal. I dismissed my attendants and opened the letter. Count Rochefort's tone was urgent. He congratulated me on the glorious capture of the Golden City, a triumph for the Plantagenet kingdom. However, he warned that the spring offensive's goal was to sow chaos, not to annex the barren north. With Solon's spring planting destroyed and their resources depleted, I had already exceeded my strategic objectives. Now was not the time for reckless risks. The Count advised me to withdraw to my starting positions and fortify my lines, warning me not to let pride or Harold's retreat blind me. Solon's century-old foundation made them a dangerous, cornered beast. My Carnford army was deep in hostile territory with a fragile supply line. A victory now would be a costly one, leaving them vulnerable to vultures in the south. He urged me to wait until autumn, when the harvest in France City would provide the supplies needed for a full-scale invasion, potentially supported by Duke Schmidt. A combined force from France City, Carnford, and Franklin would ensure a safer, more decisive victory. He implored me not to waste lives for short-term gain. The letter acted like ice water, instantly sobering my heated mind. I stood still, clutching the paper. The Count had highlighted the fundamental truths. The strategic goals were met, the risks of isolation were high, and a stronger coalition was possible later. Most importantly, the Count exposed my hidden anxiety regarding the royal capital. A Pyrrhic victory in the north would leave my army too weak to defend against the Queen Mother. I was too impatient, still too young, I whispered to myself. Harold's abandoned supplies and cities now looked like a carefully laid trap. I had nearly fallen for the bait, blinded by the army's arrogance. I needed a guaranteed victory, not a gamble. The letter had reined in my impulse. I summoned my officers and senior staff to a council. I shared the Count's advice and asked for their input. Predictably, the room divided. Leon, Brendan, and others urged a continued pursuit. They argued that Harold's cowardice and the Solonians' low morale made this the perfect time to strike. Leon's plea was passionate. Conversely, the more experienced officers supported the Count's call for consolidation. They cited logistical strains and the dangers of fighting in unfamiliar terrain. Harold is defeated, but not finished. A blind pursuit invites an ambush. The debate grew heated, with the pro-offensive faction holding the edge. The officers' overconfidence and desire for quick glory were evident, the classic precursor to defeat. I listened silently, my resolve hardening. Without the letter, I might have succumbed to the pressure, but now I was certain. It was time to withdraw and wait. Gentlemen, I said, silencing the room. The Count is right. Our spring objectives are met. Harold is a wounded wolf. Pushing him now is dangerous, and our own arrogance is a liability. I ordered a halt to the northern advance. Instead, we would systematically destroy the Golden City's infrastructure, workshops, barracks, and fortifications, and seize or burn all remaining food to ensure Harold could not recover. The order was cold and final. The officers were disappointed, seeing their glory vanish, but they obeyed. Understood, my lord. Brendan and the others replied. I softened my tone but remained firm. This is not a retreat. but a strategic repositioning. We wait for autumn, when our allies join us, to secure a total victory. Execute your orders. Upon receiving the order, the Conford army immediately shifted from a pursuit-focused posture to a systematic withdrawal. Soldiers executed a scorched earth policy, setting fire to key infrastructure in Golden City and burning the surrounding fields. I stood on the city walls, gazing calmly at the northern mountains. I ordered the systematic destruction of Golden City before retreating. While I desired to hold this Solon stronghold as a base for future northern campaigns, reality dictated otherwise. The harsh northern climate and logistical constraints made holding the city untenable. Maintaining a long supply line to a deep territory garrison was impossible. Abandoning the city and leaving it in ruins forced Harold to bear the immense cost of reconstruction if he ever reclaimed it. Though some officers were disappointed, this was the most rational decision for Conford's long-term interests. As my main force withdrew, the spring offensive concluded elsewhere. In the east, Roland, unable to take Twin Rivers City, wisely switched to a siege to pin down Solon's main force. After successfully pinning the enemy, Roland withdrew, leaving behind fortified outposts as forward bases. These outposts expanded Conford's defensive perimeter, turning former buffer zones into secure rear areas and setting the stage for a more powerful autumn offensive. The Western Front saw the only flaw in the campaign. The Lord of Valaya, eager for glory, acted recklessly and was caught in a Solon counter-ambush. The 20,000-strong Valaya force collapsed, suffering heavy losses until Werner's reinforcements stabilized the situation. This minor setback reminded me that Allied forces were unreliable and should not be entrusted with critical tasks. My decision to abandon Golden City completely blindsided Harold. The Solon king had prepared a desperate, final stand in the north, ready to gamble everything to restore his authority. Harold was like a gambler waiting for the final bet, only for me to walk away from the table. Harold's pent-up frustration was immense, as his carefully laid trap hit nothing but air. The loss of Golden City and its supplies became a humiliating gift rather than a successful lure. My refusal to engage rendered Harold's plans useless and deepened his predicament. Harold now faced a dilemma: hunker down and watch Conford consolidate power, or launch another desperate attack with depleted morale and supplies. Back in Conford, I entrusted the post-war administrative duties, awards, pensions, and reorganization to Edgar. With the casualty list long, notably the near-total loss of Roderick's Mountain Company, I left for France City to handle more pressing matters. I needed to consult with my father-in-law, Count Rochefort. In the Count's study at the governor's mansion, the two men met, the atmosphere far removed from the battlefield. After brief pleasantries regarding Charlotte and young Klein, they immediately turned to business. Their relationship allowed for efficient, high-stakes dialogue. The Count praised me for resisting the urge to pursue a risky, albeit tempting, decisive battle. It is rare for a commander not to be blinded by victory, the Count noted. I acknowledged the advice, admitting I had nearly been swayed by the momentum of victory. I reflected on the need to let my troops cool down and digest their gains before the next campaign. The Count agreed, viewing Solon's defeat as inevitable regardless of the timeline. His true concern lay in the south. Solon is a trapped beast, the Count said, leaning in. We must use this strategic window to prepare for the inner pass. I understood. The Count meant the heart of the Plantagenet kingdom and its power struggles. A conflict with Queen Regent Katerina is unavoidable, the Count stated firmly. She will not sit by while you gain power in the north. I agreed, citing evidence of the Queen's interference, including the discovery of royal-grade cannons in Solon hands and the assassination attempt on the princess. We cannot wait for her to strike, the Count said, tapping the table. Now is the perfect opportunity. I leaned in, eager to hear the plan. The Count smiled craftily, noting that the kingdom's interior was currently plagued by bandits, deserters, and crumbling order, leaving the royal capital powerless to maintain control. Count Rochefort proposed to me. Under the guise of suppressing bandits and restoring order, we shall request permission to station troops in the region. Once inside, we will claim the area remains unstable to maintain our presence, seizing key passes, absorbing remnants, and establishing a tax base until we hold the territory firmly. I was impressed by the boldness of this plan, which exploited the current power vacuum caused by the central government's decline. The Count continued, "If anyone demands we leave, we fight. The capital lacks the strength to expel us, and local lords are too divided to act. By acting swiftly and maintaining a righteous facade, we can expand our influence beyond the northern frontier, securing a strategic foothold for our eventual confrontation with the Queen Mother." The plan was simple: use legal pretexts to facilitate territorial expansion. I hesitated. It is a sound plan, but without an official royal order, will we not be accused of rebellion? The Count chuckled mockingly. "My dear son-in-law, do you truly believe we still need to wait for empty orders from place?" He added firmly, "Power is the only order that matters. Our victory over the Solonians grants us immense prestige. Who can question our loyalty when we act to protect the realm? If the Queen Mother opposes us, she appears indifferent to the people's suffering. If she permits it, we grow stronger. We must choose a target and march." I smiled, my doubts vanishing in the face of the Count's confidence. As the balance of power shifted, the old rules no longer applied. It was time for them to make their move. Deep within the royal palace and place, the atmosphere in the ornate side hall was suffocating, like the sea before a storm. A sharp crash shattered the silence. Queen Mother Catherine smashed a priceless teacup against the stone floor, spraying shards and tea onto the carpet and the guards' robes. "Useless fools," Catherine roared, her voice echoing like a wounded lioness. Her face was twisted with fury, her eyes burning with rage. "How could Henry, the heir to the Rochefort family, vanish under your watch? Are you all blind or asleep?" She heaved, her elaborate gown and jewelry trembling with her agitation. This was not just the loss of a hostage. It was a blatant challenge to her authority. Henry de Rochefort was her primary leverage over the Count and the northern frontier. The guard captain knelt, trembling. "Your Majesty, forgive me." The guards reported no disturbances, the locks were intact, and no one was seen entering or leaving. Yet, the room was empty this morning. Did he sprout wings and fly away? Catherine shrieked. A mage advisor added, pale-faced, "We detected faint, refined traces of arcane energy, the signature of a high-level teleportation spell." This was no ordinary mage's work. A mage? Catherine's eyes narrowed as she turned to Victor, her shadow and most trusted strategist. Victor stepped forward, his face hidden beneath a gray hood, his eyes cold and serpentine. He spoke calmly. "To teleport someone out of the capital so cleanly requires immense skill and motive. There are very few in the city capable of this." He named the culprit, Conrad von Schmidt, my brother and a master of spatial magic at the Academy of Arcane Arts. With his unique teleportation techniques and the Carnford Intelligence Bureau's local network, this was entirely possible. "The Schmidt family again," Catherine hissed. "I defy me in the north, and my brother strikes at my heart in the capital. Are they truly planning a rebellion?" The room fell into a deathly silence. Victor signaled for the others to leave. Alone with Catherine, he said, "Anger solves nothing. Henry's disappearance means the Rocheforts have no more reservations. Their alliance with me will only tighten." He whispered, "We must prepare. The Schmidt family, from the old Duke to me and Conrad, is clearly laying the groundwork for treason." Catherine asked hoarsely, "What can we do now?" Victor replied, "We must build an army loyal only to you, independent of the court nobles. Use your father, Count Eisenberg, and his lands as the foundation to train a new army. We have no other choice." He added gravely, "I have crushed the Solonians and taken the Golden City. My power is expanding rapidly. Once I finish off Harold, where will I turn my blade?" Catherine gritted her teeth. "Then we strike first. Mobilize the army and punish the rebels." "Impossible," Victor countered. "I hold the moral high ground by fighting the barbarians. If we attack now, we lose the support of the neutral nobles and the people. We would be destroying ourselves. Must we simply watch them grow until they come for us?" Catherine asked in despair. Victor remained silent for a moment before admitting, "Until the Solonian threat is gone, we must endure. They currently hold the initiative." He sighed. "We sent me north to be rid of me, never imagining this cub would grow into a wolf. Times have changed. We must prepare an exit strategy." He concluded, The threat comes not just from me in the north, but from the old Duke of Schmidt in the south. We are effectively caught in a pincer. Queen Mother Catherine staggered, gripping her chair for support. Her rage and defiance crumbled, replaced by profound helplessness and cold dread. She sank into her seat, her posture sagging. The opulent palace now felt cold and oppressive. She sat in silence, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests. Victor stood in the shadows like a statue. The palace was deathly quiet, save for the distant city noise. A storm was brewing, and the seat of power felt the tremors of approaching thunder. Northern Territory, Conford Castle, the Lord's study. Deep into the night, the castle was silent, save for patrols and the creaking of weather vanes. Only the study remained lit. I sat at my desk in a silk robe, brow furrowed, quill scratching across parchment as I worked by candlelight. Maps of the Plantagenet kingdom and reports on bandit activity and local noble factions lay spread before me. I was refining my plan to infiltrate the inner pass, meticulously weighing the targets, justifications for deployment, and long-term control strategies. The door creaked open, and a figure slipped inside. It was Charlotte, fresh from a bath, her damp hair smelling of herbs. She walked barefoot across the carpet to me. She wrapped her arms around my neck from behind, resting her cheek against mine, offering a comforting warmth. She leaned against my back, feeling my steady heartbeat. "It's too late," she whispered, her voice soft with sleepiness. "Time to rest, Carl." I paused, rubbing my cheek against hers. "I must finish these details for the inner pass." "Go ahead, I'll join you soon." I added, "Your brother, Henry, has been rescued." Richter and Conrad executed the plan perfectly without alerting the royal capital. "He is safe and will head north to join you soon." "Really?" Charlotte gasped, her grip tightening, her fatigue replaced by overwhelming joy. "Yes," I confirmed, patting her hand. Charlotte buried her face in my neck, smiling. She knew this rescue meant I had officially broken with the Queen Mother, binding the Rochefort family to my cause at great personal risk. She then teased, "Princess Louise will be even happier, won't she? They are the true lovers, after all." She was well aware of the deep, unfulfilled affection between Henry and the princess. I stiffened slightly. The web of relationships was messy. Charlotte and I were married, while I had once been politically wed to Louise, a woman who still loved my brother-in-law. The situation was a knot of complications. If Henry learned of the awkward history between his brother-in-law and the princess, I feared the proud, devoted Henry's reaction. It could certainly damage my ties to the Rocheforts and the princess. I sighed, turning to face her. "I may need your help to explain things to him. He'll listen to you." Charlotte smiled at my uncharacteristic discomfort. She leaned in, her breath warm against my ear, and whispered seductively, "That depends on your performance tonight." I met her playful, inviting gaze. My tension and worries vanished, replaced by a surge of raw, intense desire. Seeing her beauty, I felt my resolve melt. "As you wish, my lady." I laughed softly and swept her into my arms. Charlotte clung to me, smiling. I strode to the desk and blew out the candle. The study plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the moonlight. Elsewhere in Conford Castle, a strategy room remained sealed, shutting out the cold night. Maps and documents covered the oak table, but the room was dominated by the thick, aromatic scent of burning tobacco. I lounged in my chair, holding a slender, white paper-rolled object. I lit the end with a brass oil lamp, watching the embers glow. I inhaled deeply, letting the warm smoke linger before exhaling a long, steady stream that curled into the dim light. My inner circle, Edgar, the engineer Old Moore, Brendan, and the General Roland, all puffed on similar roles. The smoke softened their weary, battle-hardened expressions. The room felt like a gritty, pragmatic fairyland. "How is it, my lord?" Edgar asked proudly. "This is our workshop's new cigarette. It's smoother than a pipe and provides a nice boost. It's already a hit among our soldiers, craftsmen, and even some women here in Conford." I tasted it thoughtfully. While primitive compared to my past life's industrial products, it was a significant improvement over pipes and chewing tobacco. It was convenient, decent, and provided a genuine nicotine buzz. I realized this product would soon sweep through the Plantagenet kingdom and beyond. "Is it standard issue in the army now?" I asked. "Almost. Brendan replied. It's easier than alcohol for relieving stress during marches. Soldiers spend their pay on it, and it's a top-selling item for our merchants. I extinguished the cigarette and sat up. This is a powerful economic pillar for Conford. Scale it up, and we can support many more people. I outlined the supply chain: tobacco farming, workshop processing, packaging, and logistics. This will provide jobs for refugees from Solon and wounded veterans. With income, they'll consume more, stimulating our entire economy. It's far better than simple relief aid. I turned to Edgar. Is the prototype for the manual cigarette machine ready? Hand rolling is too inefficient. Edgar pulled out a blueprint. It's ready. Hector's men at the Ordnance Bureau built it. It uses a grooved roller. 2 people can operate it, and it's 10 times faster than hand rolling with uniform quality. I've ordered 50 machines for the new workshop. I've already mapped out the production flow. Edgar detailed the process: curing, shredding, flavoring, rolling, packaging, and shipping. The framework is set. He handed out samples made with the new machine. Trial production starts the day after tomorrow. Please, give your feedback. I took the light, paper box sample. It contained 10 perfectly uniform cigarettes. I lit one. It felt firm and high quality. The smoke was smooth, with a subtle, pleasant buzz. Better, I noted. What did you add? Alcohol. Purified grain alcohol to remove the raw taste, plus a secret blend of spices, Edgar explained. I nodded. It needs mint. A hint of cooling sensation would make it addictive and significantly more valuable. Edgar's eyes lit up. Mint. We'll buy every scrap we can find and start our own cultivation. It'll be our exclusive secret recipe. Edgar lowered his voice, his expression turning cold. We must keep this secret. I suggest using disabled veterans for the blending process. They are disciplined, loyal, and will guard the secret with their lives. I envision the profits. Next, ladies' cigarettes, finer tobacco, floral scents, and elegant packaging. We'll target noble women and wealthy merchants. We'll keep it exclusive to the army for now. By spring, we'll launch in Rockefeller's shops in France City and use Franklin's trade network to tease the southern markets. We'll use aggressive marketing, free samples in taverns and jingles from bards to make Conford cigarettes a status symbol. Edgar nodded but worried. What if others copy us once the secret is out? I smiled coldly. Small imitators won't match our quality or scale. My gaze sharpened. And if the big nobles or merchants try to muscle in? Edgar, you forget what other departments we have. Commercial competition isn't just about the product. Edgar understood, a knowing smile spreading across his face. Brendan, Roland, and Oldmore laughed in agreement, their mirth reflecting the cynical acceptance of those hardened by war. In this world, business competition is never just about markets or prices. The Conford Intelligence Bureau, with its experts in infiltration, sabotage, and elimination, serves as my most lethal shield and sword. Supply chains are disrupted, workshops catch accidental fires, and rivals face enthusiastic attention from thugs. In this era, true commercial moats are built with iron, blood, and bullets. After discussing tobacco plantation sites, revenue sharing with the Rockefeller family, and initial investments, the meeting concluded. I extinguished my sample cigarette in a brass ashtray and stood up to stretch my stiff neck. Edgar, lead the execution plan, I instructed. This tobacco business is vital for Conford's treasury, military, and population. Be thorough and efficient. The group rose to accept their orders. Stepping into the crisp corridor, I took a deep breath. I had no intention of becoming a smoker. The test was purely for evaluation. I had everything to live for: status, my beloved Charlotte, my son Klein, loyal subordinates, and a booming territory. I needed to stay healthy to lead Conford toward its grand future. Tobacco was a tool for wealth, not a master to serve. I envisioned gold coins transforming into cannons, warships, and a powerful army. Both the southern royal capital and the northern ice fields would tremble before this new power. After days of travel, Henry de Rochefort finally reached France City. The air felt free, lacking the suffocating surveillance of the royal capital place. He headed straight to the governor's mansion to see his father, Count Rochefort. The reunion was wordless. The count patted his son's shoulder with relief. You're back. Your mother and sister are waiting in Conford, as is Louise. Rest tonight, leave at dawn. Henry nodded, saying only, "I worried you and mother, father." After a brief rest, Henry set off for Carnford at dawn with his guards. His heart raced as the fortified silhouette of Carnford Castle appeared. They waited at the main gate. Lady Isabel was the first he saw. Seeing her aged face, filled with joy and lingering fear, brought tears to Henry's eyes. He rushed forward and embraced her. Lady Isabel sobbed, "My child, you've returned." Charlotte stood nearby, her golden hair catching the wind, smiling through tears. Henry turned to his sister, who embraced him tightly. "Welcome home, brother," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Henry noticed a new, maternal softness in her demeanor. Then, his gaze fell upon Louise, his former love. She wore a simple blue dress, looking breathtakingly beautiful. Her blue eyes were filled with longing, joy, and a hint of nervousness. Henry approached and pulled her into a long embrace. They held each other in silence, healing the scars of their long separation. The onlookers remained silent, granting them a moment of peace. Charlotte brought over a swaddled infant. "Brother, meet your nephew, Klein." Henry looked at the baby, who stared back with clear blue eyes and a toothless grin. Touched, Henry gently touched the infant's cheek. "Hello, little one. I'm your uncle." Finally, he looked at me, and the atmosphere grew tense. Henry knew of Carnford's rise, the war against the Solonians, and the annulled political marriage between me and Louise. Legally, I had been the husband of the woman he loved. I stepped forward with a sincere smile and extended my hand. "Welcome to Carnford, Henry." Seeing the pleading looks from Louise and Charlotte, Henry shook my hand. To my surprise, Henry pulled me into a brief, polite hug. It was a gesture of civility, signaling a willingness to set the past aside. "Thank you, Lord Carl," Henry said. "Thank you for rescuing me and protecting my family." I felt the stiffness in Henry's posture. I felt a pang of guilt. Despite the marriage being unconsummated, the history was awkward. "It was my duty," I replied. "Your safe return is what matters." I observed Henry, a refined intellectual, quite unlike the ruthless generals or politicians I usually dealt with. Henry didn't seem the type to resort to violence, which put me at ease. Carl proposed that Henry and the princess reside at the Amber Bay Villa, with a wedding to follow in Carnford. The blunt proposal left Henry blushing. He looked at Louise, then his mother and sister, surprised by Carl's directness. Princess Louise blushed, but squeezed Henry's hand, eyes bright with anticipation. Lady Isabel and Charlotte exchanged smiles, clearly approving. Having survived life-or-death trials, Henry valued time with his beloved and gave a reserved nod. After the banquet, Carl took Henry for a private evening stroll. "Henry," Carl said sincerely, "I must apologize for my past involvement with the princess. It was a political necessity, but I know it caused you both pain. That was my fault." Henry paused, weighing his words. "Lord Carl," Henry replied gently, "you needn't blame yourself. My father and Charlotte explained the situation. You were both pawns of the royal court. You were trapped by circumstances. The real blame lies with those in the play's palace. You owe no apology to me. You should only answer to Charlotte, who suffered the most." Carl was moved by Henry's reasonableness. "I have committed unforgivable wrongs against Charlotte," Carl admitted. "I have spent my life repenting, and thankfully, she has forgiven me and given me a family with Klein." Henry smiled genuinely, his lingering gloom vanishing. "That is all I ever wanted, for Charlotte to be happy." He looked at Carl with newfound respect. "While under house arrest and plays, I heard much about you and Carnford. You stood alone in the barren northern frontier against the Solonians, not only defending your home, but defeating powerful lords like Harold. You achieved what most would deem impossible." Henry's tone darkened with concern for the kingdom. "Without you holding the line, the North would have fallen, and war would be at the capital's gates. The power-hungry fools in plays have no idea who truly protects them." "I only did what was necessary," Carl replied calmly, "to protect my land, my family, and my people's dignity." With Henry's return and the successful extraction of Royal Steward Albert's family by the Intelligence Bureau, the Rochefort family's vulnerabilities in the capital were cleared. The facade of peace with Queen Mother Katerina was now paper-thin. A confrontation was inevitable. Carl did not wait. With the North stable and the Solonian threat temporarily checked, he launched the plan to infiltrate the inner pass. He ordered Roland, recently returned from the Eastern Front, to lead an elite infantry regiment south under the guise of assisting the kingdom in suppressing bandits and restoring order. The pretext was impeccable. With bandits ravaging the kingdom's interior and local lords powerless, no one could object. Roland's troops were battle-hardened veterans who had just decimated the Solonians. They were far superior to the disorganized local rebels. They crushed or absorbed every bandit group they encountered. Unlike typical royal forces, Karl enforced strict discipline. He knew winning hearts was more vital than mere conquest. Roland was ordered to maintain fair trade, forbid harassment, and punish any soldier who violated these rules. They never occupied civilian homes without permission and often shared rations with the truly destitute. Soon, the Confort army was hailed as a righteous force. Local peasants, initially fearful, began welcoming them and providing intelligence, having never seen such a disciplined army. Karl's war sustenance strategy was equally professional. Rather than allowing looting, which ruins local economies and breeds hatred, he deployed specialized logistics teams composed of veterans and intelligence bureau agents. These teams identified wealthy landowners and merchants who were corrupt or loyal to the Queen Mother, leaving the poor and neutral parties untouched. They would visit these targets, presenting official documents to demand supplies for the pacification effort. The compliant received receipts. The defiant were met with force, branded as bandit collaborators, and stripped of their assets. This efficient, targeted approach minimized civilian harm and even earned the army a reputation for robbing the rich to help the poor. Roland's force advanced steadily, turning key bridges and abandoned castles into fortified strongholds rather than retreating. By the time they reached the border of the field territory, they had driven a strategic wedge deep into the kingdom's heart. Local lords, initially hoping the Confort forces would leave, panicked as they saw the army building permanent fortifications and collecting transit taxes. When lords tried to bribe Roland to leave, he politely refused, citing the need to ensure regional security. Some hot-headed lords finally resorted to mobilizing their private militias to forcibly expel them. Plundering the already impoverished peasants would only incite rebellion, yielding little gain. Instead, the logistics teams focused their requisitions on wealthy landowners and merchants, specifically targeting those with questionable political loyalties or a history of greed. The logistics teams would visit targets, presenting official bandit suppression documents to justify their requisition of supplies for the sake of regional stability. Those who complied by handing over grain, cloth, and silver received a receipt stamped by the Lord of Carnford. While its actual value was uncertain, it offered a veneer of legitimacy and a promise of protection for their lives and property. For those who resisted, the logistics teams summoned the main army. Under the pretext of colluding with bandits and defying the royal forces, they would break in and seize supplies by force, often imprisoning or disappearing the defiant leaders. This efficient, targeted approach satisfied the army's needs while minimizing civilian harm, earning them a reputation for robbing the rich to help the poor and eliminating local threats. In Conford, Edgar noted that Roland's troops effectively sustained themselves, eliminating the need for vulnerable, long-distance supply lines. Roland's bandit suppression force advanced steadily, sweeping through the region with unstoppable momentum. They swiftly eliminated the bandits, but instead of withdrawing like traditional royal armies, they occupied key bridges and abandoned castles, citing the need to secure the region against further unrest, and immediately fortified these sites into permanent strongholds. Roland's forces advanced to the border of the field territory, seizing strategic forts and checkpoints to drive a wedge deep into the kingdom's heart. Local lords initially hoped the Confort people were merely passing through to assist and would soon depart. When the local lords realized these guest troops weren't leaving, but were instead building forts, setting up checkpoints, and collecting reasonable transit taxes, they finally panicked. Local lords sent envoys with gifts, urging Roland to withdraw. Roland politely but firmly refused, citing the need to suppress remaining bandits and protect the populace. Several hot-headed local lords, suffering heavy losses, mobilized their private militias and mercenaries to forcibly expel the intruders from their lands. Roland's regular army easily crushed the local lords, who suffered heavy losses when the Carnford army counterattacked their estates. Realizing the Carnford forces were disciplined, formidable, and backed by the triumphant me, the surviving lords accepted the reality that they were there to stay. The royal capital's weak reprimands were useless. Resistance meant destruction, so most lords chose silent submission. As long as their core interests remained untouched, they ignored the occupation, even secretly courting Roland to secure their status under the new order. Roland's campaign successfully achieved my strategic goal of establishing a foothold within the Inner Pass through military, political, and economic means. The blue spruce flag was firmly planted deep within the Plantagenet kingdom. "Well done, Roland," I said, reviewing the report. "Tell him to maintain this balance of force and favor. The field territory is the kingdom's granary and treasury. Our presence here is vital. Taxation eases our military costs, but more importantly, this garrison allows us to choke the capital's primary grain and water routes. With 1,000,000 mouths to feed, if the supply lines are cut, will the Queen Mother grow cabbage in the royal gardens?" Richter, the Intelligence Bureau chief, bowed. "A brilliant strategy. Controlling the field territory is like holding the capital's lifeline." Richter lowered his voice, reporting that the Queen Mother and her father, Count Eisenberg, were sensing the danger and mobilizing. They are secretly recruiting, stockpiling weapons, and training a new army. They intend to confront us directly. I chuckled with mocking interest. Finally, they stop relying on court schemes and pick up the sword themselves. Is this a cornered beast or a death rattle? I paced, fingers tapping the table as I calculated the strategic implications. Their mobilization accelerates our timeline. We cannot sustain a two-front war against both Solon and the capital. I turned to Richter. "What of Harold? That broken wolf won't be resting in the ruins of the Golden City." "Indeed," Richter replied. "Our scouts report Harold is regrouping his remaining mobile forces, heading toward the Eagle's Nest." "The Eagle's Nest? Is he planning another raid?" I asked. "Yes. After his defeat, his elite troops are gone and his supplies are exhausted. He knows he cannot defeat us in a head-on battle. He has shifted strategy, using his remaining cavalry to launch a swift, brutal raid on the weakly defended Eagle's Nest region. His goal is to seize grain, livestock, and slaves to survive the winter and buy time." My eyes turned cold. It was the instinctive reaction of a desperate nomadic power. When you cannot defeat a strong enemy, you prey on the weak. The situation was clear. The Queen Mother was arming in the south, and Harold was seeking to recover strength by raiding the border. With my main forces resting or deployed south, a large-scale offensive into Solon was currently impossible. "Harold has chosen his moment well," I sneered, seeing through the ruse. Harold had abandoned the fantasy of a fair fight, resorting to bandit-like harassment while my northern defenses were temporarily thin. "But," I said firmly, "I will not give him that chance. A successful raid would provide him with supplies, prolong his survival, and boost his morale. It would also damage our political capital if we stood by while the kingdom was ravaged. We will meet him in the kingdom, before the Eagle's Nest fortress. We will crush his raid, waste his remaining strength, and ensure he leaves with nothing. This interception must be swift and brutal. By autumn, when our supplies are replenished and the south is stable, it will be the end of Harold." May in the Eagle's Nest should have been lush and peaceful. Instead, the air was thick with the scent of rust, smoke, and fear. Harold's three-pronged raid struck the kingdom's northeastern flank like a red-hot iron. The start of the war mirrored decades of past Solonian invasions. Small, poorly defended border outposts collapsed under the Solon cavalry's arrows and shouts. The Solonians tore through the first line of defense, their hooves shattering the peace as they swept toward the fertile valleys. Yet, as the raid deepened, unexpected resistance emerged. Several mid-sized castles, led by stubborn lords, closed their gates and prepared to defend. The defenders, though pale, aimed their bows and old cannons at the enemy. This was rare. Usually, castles paid tribute to avoid conflict. These hard nails surprised the Solonians and slowed their momentum. Attacking these castles would be time-consuming and costly, violating their goal of a quick, profitable raid. Harold's commanders chose to leave small containment forces behind, bypassing the stubborn fortresses to strike at the softer, wealthier villages deeper inland. These sporadic but firm resistances stirred ripples in the dark tide of looting, signaling a subtle shift in the hearts of the borderland people. For Harold, this summer raid was a desperate gamble and a war of legitimacy to secure his throne. After crushing defeats at Conford and the Golden City, his elite forces were depleted and his prestige plummeted. Internal dissent grew, and even loyalist nobles began questioning his authority. Without tangible spoils to fill the war deficit and boost morale, his obsidian throne was at risk. His window of opportunity was narrow. He struck while the Carnford army was resting, but his own forces were hastily assembled, wounded, and undersupplied. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing move. Yet, the campaign progressed unexpectedly smoothly, bringing Harold a twisted sense of satisfaction. The Solon army faced disorganized local garrisons lacking unified command, compounded by ambiguous, defeatist orders from the royal capital, Place. Harold's spies reported that Queen Mother Catherine was entirely focused on my maneuvers in the south. To her, the northern raids were merely a minor irritation. My encroachment was the true threat to her power. Consequently, she discouraged northern resistance, hoping the Solonians would weaken the border lords allied with me. This cold, internal pacification strategy fragmented the kingdom's defense, inadvertently paving the way for Harold's success. The Solonians' goal was simple: plunder. Their route was meticulously planned to avoid strongholds and the Carnford army, focusing instead on looting wealthy, weakly defended regions. Villages, estates, and warehouses were stripped of silver, grain, textiles, livestock, and, most importantly, people. Thousands of civilians who failed to reach safety became the latest spoils under the Solon cavalry's sabers and lassos. Men were chained, while women and children were driven north by whips through the cold, early summer air toward an uncertain fate. These captives were destined to replenish the Solon ranks and slave markets depleted by the war with Carnford. The path was littered with the dead, those who collapsed from exhaustion or resisted, turning the countryside into a living hell. At the Plantagenet royal capital, Place, in the Queen Mother's chambers, Queen Mother Catherine stared at the latest northern report with disbelief. She looked at Victor in the shadows. "I am attacking the Solonians? Now, after my recent movements in the field territory?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Victor replied calmly. "Our scouts confirm I have diverted my troops toward Eglinus to intercept Harold's raiding force." Catherine tapped her desk, frowning. "Why? Does he enjoy fighting Solonians? It's unlike the calculating me to play protector of the realm after breaking with us." Victor stepped forward. "My hostility toward the Solonians is deep-rooted, but my motives are more complex and lethal. It is a two-pronged strategy. First, I cannot let Harold recover, or I face a pincer attack from the north. Second, by decisively crushing the Solonians now, I clear the northern threat, allowing me to turn my full might against us in the south. I cannot fight a two-front war, so I choose to destroy Harold first." Catherine gasped, realizing the danger. "He wants to secure the north to gain the strategic initiative against us." "Precisely," Victor nodded. "What should we do?" Catherine asked, her eyes hardening. "Should we intercept him while he's occupied?" She implied a strike against my forces. Victor shook his head. "The risk is too high. My base at Conford and Roland's forces are prepared. A failed ambush would only give me a pretext for a full-scale assault on us." He suggested a colder approach. "The best strategy is to watch the tigers fight. Let me and Harold bleed each other dry. Whoever wins will be severely weakened, making it easier for us to deal with the victor. We can even secretly aid Harold or create minor obstacles for me to ensure the conflict remains as bloody as possible." Catherine's anxiety faded into a cold, calculating smile. "As you say, let us see how the Guardian of the North and the Wolf King clash. Tell our people to observe and provide convenience to our old friend in the north when necessary." Near Osric Castle, on a hill overlooking the aftermath of a raid, Harold sat on his horse, his expression unreadable in the sunset. Below, Solon cavalry herded weeping captives and wagons of loot into their sprawling camp. The haul exceeded his expectations. His strategy of spreading his forces to sweep the river valleys had paid off, despite the risks of being countered. With the kingdom showing no sign of organized resistance, he considered pushing further south. Just then, a sweat-drenched messenger arrived, kneeling to present a scroll with a special seal. Sven checked the seal and handed it to Harold. Harold scanned the report. His smugness vanished, replaced by deep, unsettling gravity. "What is it, Your Majesty?" Sven asked. Harold didn't answer, silently handing over the report, his fingers tightening until the parchment crinkled. Sven's face paled as he read the report, his grip tightening. "Carl? He's here? Already?" Harold confirmed with a grunt. The report stated Lord Carl of Conford was leading an elite force toward Eglinus to intercept them, with scouts already skirmishing. "That man is a ghost." Sven cursed, agitated. Didn't he just finish a campaign in the south? How does he have the strength to be here? Harold remained silent, watching his soldiers celebrate. He shared Sven's growing dread. The carnage at Conford and the sight of that blue banner at the Golden City were nightmares etched into every Solonian veteran's soul. To the Solon army, Carl had become synonymous with death and invincibility. Their morale was shattered. "Keep this quiet," Harold ordered, his voice dry. "Do not let the frontline soldiers know." Sven understood. Their looting force was exhausted, isolated, and fragile. Their initial success stemmed from weak opposition and desperation. Now, burdened with gold and captives, the soldiers' will to fight had waned. News of Carl's arrival would trigger mass panic or a camp riot, as soldiers would prioritize their loot and lives over orders. "Should we continue south or raid another valley?" Sven asked hesitantly. "Stop," Harold commanded. "Cease all operations. Assemble at Osric Castle immediately. Prepare to march." He looked northwest, his expression complex. "We must leave before Carl's main force arrives. We retreat beyond the pass with what we have and avoid direct conflict." "Yes, Your Majesty." Sven saluted and left to relay the orders. He knew this was the only rational, albeit humiliating, choice. Against Carl's fresh, fierce troops, their loot-laden, demoralized force stood no chance. Harold chose to cut his losses. Survival was the only way to maintain his shaky rule. Soon, frantic horns replaced the wild sounds of looting. The Solon cavalry, grumbling, began packing their gear. Wagons were overloaded, and the long line of captives was forced to turn north toward the pass. The successful raid ended abruptly in anxiety. Standing on a ridge, Harold felt a familiar, cold, killing intent approaching from the south. He whipped his horse and joined the northern retreat. My decision to lead the pursuit was calculated. Despite my officer's eagerness, I had deeper concerns. I wasn't worried about the remnants of the Solon army, but rather the cold eyes of those in place. Empress Katerina and Victor would seize any chance to frame me for unauthorized border provocation, to mobilize local forces against me. If I weren't present, the Empress might manipulate border lords or forge royal decrees to cut off my return. Only by leading in person, under the banner of a lord, could I command authority and deter backstabbing. I brought one dragoon battalion and ordered Roland to bring another from field territory, aiming to pincer the Solonians. Speed was vital. I had to intercept them before they reached the pass. The journey south was harrowing. Villages lay in ruins, their charred beams pointing at the sky. Crops were trampled, and dazed refugees wandered toward the interior with whatever they could carry. The air was filled with the cries of the displaced. I tried to gather intelligence from the refugees, but it was futile. Their accounts were contradictory and distorted by terror, ranging from claims that the Solonians were heading south to rumors that the royal capital was under siege. "Forget it," I told my adjutant. "Fear has blinded them. We must rely on our own eyes." I ordered my scouts to increase their range. As I pondered our path, scouts returned from the southwest. The captain reported, "Lord, we found 20 or 30 elite Solon scouts near Tal Valley. They retreated into the valley when we engaged, showing caution." The staff pointed to Tal Valley on the map. It was a vital passage between the northern mountains and southern plains, capable of supporting a large army. It was a logical route for Harold to transport his loot. The presence of elite scouts suggested something valuable was being guarded there. "Order the army," I commanded, pointing southwest. "Turn south to Tal Valley. Move." Meanwhile, in Tal Valley, a massive, chaotic column moved like a sluggish, bloated python through the pass. Solon cavalry flanked the column, scanning the cliffs vigilantly. In the center, thousands of captives were roped together, weeping and stumbling in despair. The captive column was flanked by hundreds of looted carts and wagons piled high with sacks, crates, and livestock, their cries echoing through the line. Banners bearing eagle and sparrow totems identified the force as the Sparrow Legion, one of the 8 Solon army units, led by Ulf. Unlike Harold's cautious main force, Ulf was notoriously greedy. He shied away from fighting me, but was always first to plunder. Dazzled by the southern wealth, he ignored Harold's orders for a swift, hit-and-run campaign. Like a wolf in a sheepfold, he rampaged through the southern Eaglenist region, looting at will. Due to his deep penetration, Harold's urgent order to retreat north reached him only after much delay. Upon learning that I, the source of his nightmares, was approaching, a panicked Ulf ordered his troops to gather their loot and captives, rushing north toward Tal Valley to escape. A guide told Ulf, "Once we clear Tal Valley, we hit the plains. Our cavalry will be untouchable." The local garrisons have already fled. Mounted on a stolen steed, Ulf's fear subsided, replaced by his habitual arrogance. Looking at his massive haul of captives, walking gold and labor, he grinned, baring yellow teeth. "Run? I've got too much loot to flee like a dog. Karl is tough, but so am I." Scouts returned, reporting, "Legion Commander, Tal Castle stands ahead, occupied by a significant force. Their banners are unknown." Ulf roared with laughter. "Excellent. I needed more slaves anyway. They've delivered the meat right to our mouths." Drawing his scimitar, he bellowed, "Lads, a castle full of loot and slaves awaits. Kill the men, take the women and riches. Let's get more slaves." He added, gritting his teeth, "Karl, I'll pluck this thorn out first and make my fortune." Driven by greed, the undisciplined Solon raiders grew restless. The cavalry howled, driving the captives and wagons toward the tempting Tal Castle. Tal Castle, the stone fortress guarding the northern throat of Tal Valley, stood like a stubborn reef against the rising tide of war. Outside the walls, the scene was tragic. Hundreds of refugees from burned villages pounded on the iron-reinforced oak gates, pleading, "My lord, please, open the gates. The barbarians are coming. Let us in. The children are small. We are honest subjects, not spies." Their desperate cries echoed through the narrow valley. The response from the ramparts was colder than the mountain wind. "Get lost," roared a burly man in a dented iron helmet, Lord Heberson. His face was twisted with paranoid vigilance. "How do I know you aren't Solon spies? Get out. If anyone lingers, my musket won't recognize you." To intimidate them, he signaled his trembling soldiers to fire their old matchlock muskets into the dirt. The sulphurous smoke and flying lead shattered the refugees' last hopes. The gunfire sounded like a death knell, turning cries into stifled sobs. Realizing the Lord would not save them, the crowd fell into a numb, resentful silence. They eventually dispersed, casting hateful glares at the cold figure on the wall. This bearded lord was Heberson, the hereditary master of Tal Castle. Despite his elegant name, he was a corrupt, greedy border noble who thrived on graft and oppressing his subjects. However, he was also fiercely brave, hot-tempered, and thick-skinned. When others fled the Solon invasion, Heberson made a mad decision. He would hold Tal Castle. His official garrison of 300 had dwindled to fewer than 200 through years of neglect. After the invasion news, only about 100 remained. Heberson improvised, arming every man with rusted spears, pitchforks, and sharpened sticks, plus the refugees he conscripted, forming a ragtag force of 300. Surprisingly, Heberson's reckless, don't-give-a-damn attitude created a strange sense of cohesion. In the panic, his refusal to retreat made him the backbone his men needed. Under his roaring and whips, the militia fortified the walls and cleared firing lines, with no one daring to desert. Heberson went all in, distributing his personal wealth to his 100 veterans. He slaughtered all the livestock in the castle, For days, the scent of meat filled the air as every soldier received a hearty meal. Eat, eat your fill, and fight those sullen bastards. Heberson shouted, clutching a wineskin. Hold the castle, and we live. I'm not planning on leaving here alive. Tal Castle held a vital position as the last, strongest pass in the north. Beyond it, the valley opened into the northern plains, but at this bottleneck, the path narrowed to 40 paces, flanked by sheer cliffs. The castle was built on a plateau within this narrow passage, blocking the only road. Attacking from the cliffs was impossible due to the steep, slippery terrain. It was a true natural choke point. As Ulf's bloated, sluggish raiding column arrived, they faced this silent, formidable obstacle. Ulf squinted at the castle. The walls were low and the garrison seemed small, but their defiant stance and the terrain made him uneasy. Ulf had seized over 6,000 captives and vast spoils. Though arrogant and dismissive of Harold's orders, he lived in genuine fear of me. Upon hearing reports that I might be pursuing him, Ulf's sole desire was to escape back beyond the pass with his loot. My northward march had been easy, crushing minor outposts, but Tal Castle was clearly a different beast. Damn it, some of them actually stayed to fight. Ulf spat, feeling agitated. The terrain made it impossible to bypass the castle with his heavy supply wagons and livestock. Abandoning the supplies would render his raid pointless and leave him unable to justify the losses to his men. He had to take the pass. Greed and fear overcame his hesitation. With a fierce glint in his eyes, Ulf issued his command. Drive the captives up. Make them dig and carry stones. Start with the weakest. If they die, use their corpses to build a ramp. Over 100 turncoat Solon soldiers drove hundreds of desperate, starving captives, mostly women, children, and the elderly, toward the walls. Forced to work under fire, the captives dug soil and carried stones, piling them against the base of Tal Castle's walls. Thomas and Einar, Solon veterans who had survived the battle at Conford, watched from the rear. They stood with other veterans, arms crossed, viewing the use of human shields as standard tactical procedure. Look, no need for rams or ladders, Einar noted. The Solon soldiers were impatient, forcing the captives to build the ramp directly. Gradually, a low but rising mound of earth and stone formed against the wall. A second group of stronger slaves, holding makeshift shields, provided cover for the laborers. The real threat, however, were the Solon archers positioned behind the slaves and on the slopes. These skilled hunters used the terrain to rain arrows upon the defenders, far outclassing the castle's return fire. The air was filled with the sound of whistling arrows. Defenders fell from the battlements, screaming. As the Solon archers suppressed the wall, the ramp grew. Once it reached the height of the parapet, the heavy infantry would storm the castle. Ulf believed that, unlike the tough nuts of Conford and France City, no Plantagenet force could withstand a sustained Solon infantry assault. On the ramparts, Heberson raged like a lion. Despite 2 arrows piercing his chainmail, he snapped the shafts and bandaged his bleeding wounds, refusing to stop. Wielding a 2-handed sword, he screamed orders for his men to drop stones, logs, and boiling excrement. Smash them. Target the archers. Pour the filth. Don't let them up. Inspired by his ferocity, the defenders fought back, raining debris onto the attackers below. The captives bore the brunt of the defense, falling in droves. Solon overseers callously dragged the bodies, dead or alive, to the wall to serve as construction material for the ramp. Thomas watched the carnage, telling Einar, "Once our heavy infantry charges up that slope, that Plantagenet lord is dead. How many can one man kill?" Einar grinned, missing a tooth. For sure. This isn't Conford, after all. The mention of Conford dimmed their smiles, a lingering trauma surfacing in their eyes. As the ramp reached 2/3 of the wall's height, the order for the final assault was given. Warriors, charge. Kill them all. The gold and women are yours. Over a dozen heavy Solon infantrymen roared, shields raised and weapons drawn, scrambling up the muddy, unstable slope. Despite the treacherous footing, the first Solon soldier leaped onto the parapet. Die! Heberson roared, his greatsword swinging in a lethal arc. The attacker was cleaved off the wall before he could even see his opponent. But the breach was made. More Solon soldiers swarmed up, turning the ramparts into a chaotic, bloody melee. Defenders and attackers fell in equal measure, staining the stones with blood. Heberson fought like a mad tiger, his sword a whirlwind of death. He roared vulgar encouragement to his dwindling men, urging them to hold the line. Kill one, and you're even. Kill two, and you've profited. Think of your homes. Think of the silver. His shouts ignited a spark of defiance in the weary soldiers and militia, who began to roar back in return. The first wave of over 20 elite Solon soldiers was repelled by the desperate defenders in the cramped terrain. Most of the attackers were killed, their bodies piling up on the wall or falling below. The Solon assault had failed. On the walls, the survivors were exhausted, wounded, and gasping for air. Heberson leaned on his sword, his face masked in blood from a deep gash, his body riddled with wounds. He looked down at the regrouping Solon forces and the ramp, now soaked in blood and mud. He spat a glob of blood toward the enemy below. Then, in full view of the stunned Solon army, he grabbed the severed head of a Solon soldier from the wall and hurled it toward Ulf's position. The head landed in the mud, its lifeless eyes staring blankly at the sky. The second wave of Solon soldiers screamed and surged toward the blood-soaked ramp once more. Tal Castle's low walls became a vortex of slaughter, filled with the clash of steel and deafening screams. Surprisingly, the defenders' cries of "kill" grew louder amidst the carnage, their morale surging rather than breaking. The battle turned white-hot, thick with the stench of blood.